This is part 2 and 3, the continuation and the end of his story. It picks up right where part 1 stopped, so watch that first, it's on the channel. They thought they were burying me with the bones. They were planting them. That was the thought I stood on. That first morning of the new roost. All 10 of them held the ridgeline over the valley. Dirge at the point, the champion's gold-catching first light. Dawnfang making the sunrise look derivative. Under their wings, the whole yard shone white below, bone laid out like a thing planted in rows. Ash from the first hollowed still dusted their wingbacks from yesterday's war. Dirge shook it off his bone crest. I counted them twice, the way Maud taught me. 10, both times. The counting was the easy part of that morning. The envoys had come through the gate at midnight. 2 foreign banners hung on the yard wall in the dawn wind. The first showed Coldharbor's crown, stitched in sea green. The second showed the keeper's mark, an egg cupped in 2 hands. Not Stonecrown's crown. The gate guards saw that. So did I. Maud stood at the gate with her count slate. She had marked the 2 banners in at midnight, 1 stroke each. Now she walked the envoys across the yard herself. The first envoy reached me before my tea went cold. Salt had bleached her coat white at every seam. "Agnes," she said, "Coldharbor's sea chancellor." She did not bow. She knelt and unrolled a sea chart on the stones. Her fingers stopped on a drawn line of stacked stone, blight procs. Little inked drakes crowded the water past the chart's west edge. Gray sea drakes pull our seawall down every night. We count 30 days of wall left. Then the ocean takes the city, street by street. Her voice never rose. "My rowers sleep on the seawall now," she said, "with spears." The second envoy stood by a bundle of scorched wool. His boots had walked their soles thin. He had carried it in at midnight like it weighed a kingdom. Now he pulled the last wrapping away in front of me. The wool steamed in the morning cold. Scorch rings marked it, layer after layer, night after night. A black egg stood on the yard stones. A twin to mine. Same shell, same size, same dark. Heat came off it in a shimmer, like air over a forge. The charter party stepped back a pace. On the ridge, 10 dragons went still at once. Raw burns covered both the man's palms. "Dong-kun," he said, "keeper of Stonecrown's crypt." I was, anyway. No crown had sent him. The keeper's mark at the gate was his own banner, not his kingdom's. He watched the egg the whole time he spoke. It stirred the night I ran. 60 days, it has grown hotter, 1 wing at a time. Last night it near burned through the wrappings. I did that count in my head. 60 days ago was the night Dirge hatched. My first. The crown's charter party had stayed the night to paper the new roost. A valley lord shoved out of that ring. He went for the egg with both hands. "For the crown vault," he said. The shell threw him back across the stones. He sat down hard in the bone dust. He held up a hand seared white across the palm. Everyone in the yard watched it happen. A healer rapped the hand at the wall. The Lord watched the egg the whole time. Everyone did. The egg had voted. The way the gold one chose, once. Coldharbor's riders watched from the gate with their mouths open. By nightfall, that story would run halfway to the coast. I walked over and set my palm on the shell. Heat pushed against my hand like a heartbeat. I so rout. Light rose under my fingers, gold on black. I broodmuther vessel, true egg, clutch, 9/12. Asked she, cools in 60 days. Wake the last 3 flights. Maud read it over my shoulder. Boyd read it over hers. The ring of houses read it off our faces. The words hung in the light over the shell. 1 word stood taller than all the numbers. She. Something in that shell was a she. Maud said the other half out loud. 60 days of warmth, she said. Then we stand over a second cold egg. Boyd jabbed a finger at the first line. 12 of what? He said. 1 egg hatched you 9. Nobody here ever counted 12 of anything. 9, it said. I stood there with 10. Whatever this egg was counting, it wasn't my dragons. Here is what no one in that yard knew. My own egg hadn't said a word since the 9 patch. The court thought I could hatch dragons forever. I had 10, and only Maud knew the forge was cold. Maud caught my eye across the warm shell. She kept her face still. Still, every lord out there was spending dragons I could not make. They were promising my wings to 2 kingdoms in the same breath. My title tightened around me like a rope. Warden of the flights. Now warden of hers too. The seared lord found his voice first. "It landed on valley stones," he said. "The crown will count it as a valley asset." He cradled his wrapped hand while he said it. 2 clerks behind him started writing. An older house lord laughed once. "Count it, then," he said. "Walk it to the vault yourself." The keeper stepped between the clerks and the shell. He raised both burned palms like an oath. "I carried it 60 days," he said. "It cooked me through the wool every night. It let me carry it. It will never let you own it. He turned his palm so the whole ring saw. Eggs don't warm for kingdoms. They warm for the one they choose. The clerks looked at the Lord's wrapped hand. They stopped writing. Nobody reached for the egg again after that. The Sea Chancellor rolled her chart with a snap. I am not here to own anything, she said. My city has 30 days of wall. You have 10 dragons and a warm egg. Come west, Warden. Coldharbor will open every chart and every grave it holds. Boyd came down off the ridge at midday. He had kept his long glass on the western sky since first light. He wiped ash off the lens with his thumb first. He gave the count flat, the way he gave bad ones. 40 gray wings on the west wind, and climbing. So the first day of the roost lined its numbers up for me. 30 days of wall on the Sea Chancellor's chart. 60 days of warmth under my palm. 40 wings on the wind in Boyd's glass. None of them would wait for the others. Behind me, the clerks went on counting the egg into a ledger. The egg had already answered it with a burned hand. I turned to the keeper. It says, wake the last 3 flights. It doesn't say where they sleep. It doesn't say where it opens. The keeper touched a lead seal on a cord at his throat. The right ends at a place called the cradle. Guy, where the cradle lies, the book knows. He opened his coat the width of a hand. A chained book sat flat against his ribs, and my seal keeps the book shut, even now, even here. His burned fingers closed around the little seal. What is Stonecrown afraid of? I asked him. The keeper looked west and said nothing at all. That silence was an answer. I just couldn't read it yet. I put my hand back on the warm shell. I said it loud enough for every banner and every tent. Wake the last 3 flights. Reach the cradle. Open her egg. On the ridge, 10 dragons answered in one voice. Dirge first, then Squall, then all of them together. The roar shook bone dust off the valley walls in one white sheet. The sound rolled down the yard and into the dark. The herald wrote the vow into the court's ledger as I spoke. Word for word, the way verdicts start. The Sea Chancellor bowed her head once, like wax taking a seal. Full dark brought torches out along the gate wall. A lathered horse came through the gate at a gallop. Its flanks steamed in the torchlight. Its rider carried 1 letter and no escort. Hardwax closed it. Stonecrown's seal. He put it in the herald's hands and no one else's. The herald broke the wax. He read it to the torchlight word for word. The egg of Stonecrown returns under seal, and the keeper who stole it, or nothing of yours, crosses the west again. The herald lowered the letter. Ingrid, he said, Stonecrown's regent. The ring of houses turned to look at the keeper. The keeper stood by the egg with his burned hands open. He did not run. So there it was. A kingdom crawling with the gray wanted its egg back shut. 2 kingdoms had come begging to one gate. One of them begged with a knife. The keeper's banner still hung there, an egg cupped in 2 hands. Torchlight moved across it while the herald folded the letter away. On the wall, Boyd set his glass down facing west. Under my palm, the shell beat like a slow heart. She was already counting. Across the yard, my own egg sat dark on its stone bed. That silence needed a test no court could watch. Midnight then. I carried an armload of bone into the boneyard at midnight. Stormline, pure, the last sorted seam from the war. Maud walked next to me and held the lantern high. She barred the yard gate behind us with her own hands. No guards tonight, no court, 2 black eggs, and the 2 of us. The keeper's egg steamed on its sled by the wall. Heat rolled off it in slow waves. My egg sat on its stone bed next to the forge. Same shell, same size, same dark. One of them breathed. One of them sat shut like a door. Overhead, the brood shifted on the roost walls in their sleep. Dirge's bone crest caught the lantern light once and went dark. I knelt and stacked the bones against my shell, the old way. 1 lineage of feeding, picked clean, nothing mixed. That rule built me 9 dragons. I laid the last bone and put my palm flat on the shell. Nothing came. No light under my fingers, no heat in the stone, no word. Wrong bones always got an answer, at least. Mixed bones, it used to throw back before they settled. This got silence. Not even a no. I pressed until my arms shook. The shell stayed cold under both my hands. I put my forehead against it and listened. I counted heartbeats, all of them mine. Behind me, the warm egg ticked and breathed. Its heat reached me from across the yard. My own shell could not even warm my palm. Maud ran the lantern along the shell, base to crown. The light found no seam and no glow. Since the 9th? She asked. Not 1 word since Dawnfang, I said. The 9th was the last. We stood with the dark egg between us. For the first time since the tally, I was afraid. Not of the gray wings out west, of a shell that had stopped talking to me. Maud laid her hand flat next to mine on the cold stone. 9 dragons, she said. No forge in any story ever gave more. It was kind. It still sounded like words over a grave. She took her hand back and turned to the table. Work first. She taught me that too. And two, I pulled the wool cover over my egg myself. The cloth settled on it like snow on a stone. Maud set the lantern on the forge table. Then we planned by her count, not yours, she said. She unrolled her roost charter across the scarred wood. She weighted its corners with sorting stones. 13 flight marks ran down the page in her steady hand. Next to each mark sat a small drawing of a roost. Every mark stood for a flight that once held the sky. 12 of the 13 lay under old crossstrokes. Dead 100 years, everyone. The 13th mark stood alone, unbroken. The gold, the one flight that never fell. 9 of the dead marks wore fresh chalk rings. Maud had drawn those this year, hatch by hatch, Dirge's line, squalls, red moths. 6 more under them. 3 dead marks had no chalk at all. Boyd knocked at the yard gate and Maud let him in. He still wore his long glass on its strap. He took one look at the table and pulled up a stool. "You two start every war at a table," he said. Nobody laughed. He leaned in anyway. I walked over to the warm egg and set my palm on it. Light climbed under my fingers, gold on black. Excels, CHS, CHLs, 9CA12, carried the page over and held it next to the shell. Ink and light, side by side, saying the same thing. Boyd looked from the shell to the page and back. He counted with one finger, mark for mark. 9 of 12, he said. Same as her page. 12 flights died, 9 are home. He sat back slow. There's my answer from the field. It never counted your dragons, Reeve. It counts flights. Her count, Maud said. She tapped the dead marks. The dead flights coming home. The gold never died, so the gold is not in her 12. 9 home, 3 still in the ground. 10 dragons stood on my stands, and the shell said 9. On the field, that number had looked like a mistake. On Maud's page, it lined up clean. 3 bear marks, 3 dead flights somewhere in the west. Under my palm, the warm shell beat like a slow heart. It felt like agreement. Maud drew her belt knife and touched the first bear mark. A sea roost sat inked next to it, small and neat. Tied first, she said. 30 days of wall against 60 days of warmth. We reach the drowning city before it drowns. Or not at all. The knife moved to the second bear mark. A high mountain roost drawn among little peaks. Frost second. Behind a border that just closed to us. Cur. The knife stopped at the last mark. An old burn had eaten half of it away. Someone had held a coal to that one spot on the page. The burn looked older than anyone living. Glass last, Maud said. The mark is scorched. No one living knows where that flight died. Somebody knew, Boyd said. Somebody burned it. And that question keeps until the road answers it, Maud said. She sheathed the knife. 10, 11, 12. In that order, or we lose the race. Boyd hooked a thumb at the dark beyond the wall. Every mile of it west, he said. Straight into the gray wings on the west wind. Then the whole brood flies, I said. Nobody stays home. Boyd nodded once and went to wake his hunters. The herald found us before first light. He carried the court's writ, the wax on it still warm. The court had voted through the night by torchlight. Glad, every bench of them. Send the warden west. Send all 10 dragons with him. Save 2 kingdoms with wings they thought had no bottom. Not one lord voted to keep me home. From their benches it cost nothing. My forge was endless. Everyone knew. One more instruction, the herald said. He did not enjoy it. I ride with you. The court will have its asset counted. Every hatch, every loss, he said. Asset the way clerks say it. The count was the point. The wings just carried it. I looked at Maud. Maud looked at the covered egg by the forge. Every bench in that hall was spending a forge only she knew was cold. I signed the writ and handed it back. Some fights you carry west with the baggage. Dawn came up thin and pale over the Boneyard gate. 10 dragons stood on the field in loose ranks. Frost smoked off their wings as the light rose. The 2 foreign banners still hung where yesterday left them. Coldharbor's crown and an egg cupped in 2 hands. The keeper took his own banner down and folded it small. He packed it on the sled with steady, bandaged hands. 1 kingdom at a time, he said. The sea chancellor waited under the gate arch, charts under one arm. The herald sat his horse in court dress, ledger open on the saddle. He counted the dragons out loud as they woke. 10, he wrote. 10 like coins into a box. I wheeled my own egg out of the forge yard on a barrow, cold shell, wrapped in wool, heavy as a millstone. Maud stepped in close at the sled, voice low. You could leave it with the valley guard. Cold or not, it's still mine. I strapped both eggs onto the one travel sled myself, dark shell and warm shell, side by side. The shells touched. Gold light flared across the warm one. Once, it washed over the dark egg like sun through water. Then it was gone. The warm shell went back to its slow heat. The cold shell stayed cold under its wool. Maud's hand had stopped on the strap. She saw it. I saw it. Neither of us had a word for it. Later, she said, and cinched the strap tight. Whatever that light was, the road would have to answer it. The sled carried both questions west. The sea chancellor met my eye as I passed the arch. 30 days of wall when I left home, she said. Fewer now. Ride like it. Maud walked to the gatepost with her travel staff. Fresh cut ash, tall as her shoulder, clean down its length. She drew her knife and cut one notch at the top. She held the staff up so the whole gate saw it. Notch 1 of 60, she said. Every dawn takes another day of warmth. She slung the staff across her back where the column would see it. 60 days of warmth and the first cut already spent. I set my hand on the warm shell one last time. I said it the way I said it on the tally field. Wake the last 3 flights. Reach the cradle. Open her egg. Out on the field, 10 dragons came up off the frost together. Their wing beats hit the gate like one drum. Keeper caught my sleeve in the shadow of the arch. He drew me a step from the sled, out of earshot. He looked west down the road first, then at me. His voice came out low, worn flat by the long run west. My regent will never let you open it on Stonecrown soil. Remember I said that? Dawn broke over the first road camp, a day west of the gate. I walked the 2-egg sled into the column's heart myself. Wagons ahead of it, wagons behind, wings above. Anything that wanted the eggs would have to open the whole column first. The gold champion took point before anyone asked him. He had flown point for me since the tally field. No order put him there. He put himself there. He hung high and small against a huge cobalt sky. Under him, the grass ran gold to the world's edge. The west road cut through it, one long white chalk line, the brood strung out above the road in a spear shape. Dirge led the left file, Squall the right. First time the whole flight had ever traveled as one. It looked like it had always done this. Maud stood at the head of the column with the staff. 2 cuts showed at the top now. Notch 2 of 60, she said, and slung it across her back. The column moved. The order set itself inside a day. Boyd's hunters rode wide on both flanks, bows strung. The keeper walked next to the sled from dawn to dusk. He checked the eggs' wrappings with bandaged hands, hour by hour. He never touched the shell itself. Keepers don't, he said. They keep. The Sea Chancellor rode with the forward wagons and pushed the pace. Every halt was shorter than the one before it. The herald kept his ledger open on the saddle horn. Every dawn he counted the dragons out loud. Every dawn he wrote 10. The warm shell ticked against its straps like a slow heart. Cold One rode next to it, wrapped and silent. I checked both sets of straps at every halt myself. Notch 3 went into the staff, then Notch 4. By then the marches had changed under us. The gold grass broke against white chalk cuts and dry stream beds. No farms out here, no herds, no smoke. Boyd rode with his long glass out from the 4th dawn on. The champion dropped low over a chalk cut ahead of the column. He screamed once, the short scream, contact. They came out of the cut fast and low, gray, a full pack of them, wide-winged, flying a tight wedge. Not the ragged gray we broke at home. These held a shape, and the shape held. They came straight down the road at the column's heart, at the sled. I stood up on the sled rail and called the flight. Squall, wind on the wedge. The storm dragon rolled, and the air turned hard sideways. The wedge staggered against a wall of driven wind. Red maw, the face of it. Ember fire raked the front rank out of the sky. Burning gray hit the chalk and did not rise. Grape on, the sled. The king line came down next to me like a dropped keep. His shadow covered both eggs whole. Tore and set himself on the sled's other side, low, jaws open. The keeper threw himself flat over the warm shell, arms spread. Maud stood over the Cold One with her belt knife out. Nobody had ordered either of those. Nobody needed to. The wedge split around the fire and closed up again. Fast. Faster than anything gray had a right to be. Half of it swung wide for a second pass at the sled. I saw the swing before it finished. Veer D. Gree, the left arm. On Ix, under it. They took the left arm apart over the grass, high and low at once. Boss Salt came down on the right arm like a rock slide. The champion dropped through the middle of them, gold through gray. What was left broke west, still flying in order. Even beaten, they did not scatter. Boyd's hunters put arrows after them until the range gave out. Dirge walked the ground under all of it. Nothing that fell in front of him got up. The whole thing ended before the dust settled on the wagons. The grass smoked in 2 thin lines along the road. Redmaw landed by the burn lines and shut his fire away. Squall shook the last of the wind out of his wings. 10 dragons wheeled once over the column and took their places again. Not one gray had come within a spear throw of the sled. For one breath, I let myself be proud of them. The herald had stood on his wagon seat through the whole fight. He sat back down and squared his ledger. 10 at dawn. 10 after. Nothing to cross out. He wrote it small and neat, and his hand shook doing it. The count held. Even he looked glad of that, clerk or not. Boyd knelt over a dead gray in the flattened grass. He spread one wing wide with his knife hand. Lean muscle under it. Whole scales. No old scars from the home war on it anywhere. The gray on it thin as first frost. This one turned this year, he said. Killing the first hollowed ended nothing. New gray are still rising in the west. He stood and wiped the knife on the grass. Nobody argued. The road went west, too. Riders sat the ridge south of us, a still line against the sky. Sea green cloaks, Coldharbor colors. Outriders come east along the road to meet the Sea Chancellor. They had watched the whole fight from the high ground. Their lead rider came down the chalk at a canter. He reined in by the wagons and looked at the dragons, not at me. We counted 10, he said. 10 fighting as one flight over a baggage column for a foreign city. He turned his horse before I found an answer. The coast will hear it by morning, he called back. His line went with him, west at a gallop. The Sea Chancellor watched the dust with something close to a smile. You just saved my riders a speech, she said. By tomorrow, every watchtower on that coast will say the same thing. The warden flies with 10. Maud cut notch 5 at dawn and held the staff up for the column. That dust boyd climbed the tallest chalk bluff with his long glass. We watched him from the cook fires, a black mark against the last light. He counted out loud, slow, the way he counts. Then he came down and gave the sky its number. 40 wings on the west wind, he said. The same 40 I called from the ridge of home. They haven't scattered. They haven't fed on anything either. They're holding together out there, waiting on something. Maud looked at the staff on her shoulder, then west, and said nothing. The keeper drew the egg's wool up tighter and said nothing either. 40 wings that held together was not a flock. It was a muster, and it was waiting for something west of us. The staff took its cuts, dawn by dawn. 6, 7, the chalk country sank into pale dune grass. On the 7th day, the wind turned and came in tasting of salt. The dragons caught it first and rode higher, wider. Gulls came over the column, the first birds in days. The champion never once gave up the point. Each dusk he landed last, after every other wing was down. Notch 8 went into the staff at the last camp. That evening we topped the coast ridge with the light dying. The sea stood up in front of us, edge to edge, green glass water, dark and deep, moving all the way out. The column stopped without any order from me. Night came down while we stood there looking. Far out, the city hung its lantern strings orange over the water. Great Bone rumbled at the sea, deep answering deep. Torrent, the fendrake, drank the wet air like a homecoming. And under the bay, deep down, a pale light spread wide, green-white, steady, a sunken field of it glowing under the tide. The drowned yard, the Sea Chancellor said next to me. The tide flight went down with its roost. That glow is their bones. My city falls asleep by that light and calls it a blessing. Tide first, Maud said, and set the staff by the sled. The first of her 3 flights lay under that glow. Then horns sounded along the seawall, thin with distance. The gray were at the wall again, same as every night. We started down the ridge road in the dark. We came off the ridge at first light. Gray wings were already over the city. I called Squall off the column before the gate horns finished. Coldharbor stood out in the sea on wooden legs. Stilt streets ran over storm-teal water. Salt terraces climbed the shore, white as old bone. Orange lantern strings still burned from the night before. The seawall showed fresh timber patches everywhere. Wall crews worked the cracks with the sea at their backs. And on the north wall, the gray were tearing at one of those crews. Sea drakes, wide-winged and dripping, coming up out of the green glass shallows. One had a walkway in its jaws, and people still on the walkway. Squall came down the wind with a storm in his wings. The air over the north wall turned hard and white. The gray hit that wind and went sideways into their own sea. The walkway dropped to the terrace, and the people held on. Red Mob burned the water where the drakes rose. What came out of the smoke flew broken. The rest went deep and stayed down. The wall crew stood up slow behind their carts. Then the bells began, not the alarm bells, all the others. We rode the causeway in under that sound. People hung off the stilt walks to see the dragons pass. Children ran the rails, keeping pace with the sled. The gate captain called down from his tower. The towers said the warden flies with 10. We counted. It's true. Maud cut notch 9 against the gatepost. Notch 9 of 60, she said, and shouldered the staff. The Sea Chancellor did not go to her hall. She went straight up the seawall stairs and took us with her. Runners came at her from both sides. She gave orders through them between our questions. Her clerks pinned the bay chart to a plank table. I kept waiting for the price. There wasn't one. Every chart I own is yours, she said. Every grave, too. Coldharbor doesn't haggle while it's drowning. She walked 2 fingers out across the chart. The drawn lines told one simple, ugly story. Deep water on both sides, sunken drake roosts all through it, one sand road out to the drowned yard, and the sea owned that road. Fire is no use underwater, she said. The tide is the only door. It opens tomorrow at mid-morning. It gives you the yard for 2 hours. Then it takes it back. She tapped the wall under the table. My tide pilots will call the water. When they blow the turn, you run. The keeper leaned over the chart on his bandaged hands. Down at the stairfoot, the warm shell ticked against its straps. It had ticked faster since the first salt wind. The Sea Chancellor wanted to give more than charts. She led us down behind the salt terraces to a pit chalked white with lime. Bones filled it, tangled and heaped, a siege's worth. Her voice went flat over it, like a woman confessing. The first year, we killed everything gray that landed. We shoveled them in here and ran back to the walls. Nobody said words over them. There was no time. She looked at me, not the pit. Bones are bones. If bones are what she eats, take these too. Topic crew. The keeper unwrapped the crown of the shell. I set my palm on the warm black stone. It went still under my hand. Then the letters rose, cold and flat. A. Refused. W. Refused. W. Not a flicker of heat behind it. A door shutting, the keeper drew the wool back up without a word. Maud looked into the pit a long moment. Then she said it plain. Her dead she takes home. Kills, she refuses. The Sea Chancellor did not argue or ask twice. She stood at the pit's edge with her jaw set. Then we owe these a burial, she said. We should have dug it the first year. By dusk, her own guards were down in the pit, digging. That night, the whole bay glowed under the wall. The drowned yard lay green-white under the tide, wide as a town. The city's windows faced that glow like it was a hearth. Maud picked her sorting crews on the wall by lamplight. She held up 2 bones, one in each fist. A drake bone from the pit, dull as slag. A tide bone the temple kept, bright as the inside of a shell. Tide bone shines, she told them. Drake bone drinks the light. If you are not sure, leave it. She made every picker name the difference back to her. The keeper checked the egg's wrappings hour by hour, the way he always did. Boyd took the first watch over the sled himself. Below us, the glow rode the black water, steady as a lamp. Maud cut notch 10 at first light. 10 of 60, she said, and set the staff by the causeway gate. The keeper lifted the warm egg out of its cradle. He strapped it to my back, wool and all. You carry her today, he said. Get her close to her dead. Eggs listen. Mid-morning, the sea slid back and kept sliding. The bay drained lane by lane, pool by pool, and the yards stood up out of the water, white arches taller than the gate towers. Ribs in long rows, a whole roost round standing. The tide flight had gone down with a tome around it. Green pools glowed faint in every shadow. A sand road ran out from the causeway stones, dead straight. I set the flight where her chart said the danger slept. Durjay walked the yard. The bone-wise Vern went down the sand road first, in among the arches. He stepped over the old bones, never on them. Great Bon, hold the causeway. You're the road home. The king line set himself across the stones and filled them. Squall, the surface. Nothing comes up through it. The storm dragon hung out over the deep water. The swell under him went flat and white. Hor, Ent, slid into the tide pools without an order. The fendrake moved through them like he was born there. The sorting crews went in behind Dirge with baskets on poles. Maud stood at the first heap and gave them the law. 1 bloodline, a meal, a single stray bone, and she refuses everything. 2 hours of tide to pick a flight's worth clean. Then her hands were moving, and every hand moved with them. Tide bone to the baskets. Everything else left where it lay. Lay them in, she said. Don't throw them, they're going home. The bones came up pearl bright out of the green pools. Drake bone lay tangled through them, dull and heavy. The baskets filled slow. The sea waited loud on both sides of the yard. Then the pools along the deep line began to shiver. The gray came up out of the deep water together. Wet wings burst the surface in a ragged line. Squall dropped the sky on them. His storm flattened the swell all along the deep line. What his wind missed came in low along the flats. For Ent hit the first one in the shallows and rolled it under. Dirge met the rest in the middle of the yard. He broke them across the old ribs, one after another. Nothing got past him to the pools. A wedge swung wide for the causeway and the baskets. Great Bon did not rise to meet it. He stayed, and they broke around him like water on stone. Boyd's hunters shot the leavings out of the air from the causeway rail, and the crews never stopped picking. Maud's voice carried through all of it, flat and even. Sort, leave it, move. The tide pilot's horn blew the turn from the wall. The gray pressed hardest right then like they knew the door was closing. Squall storm answered, and the deep line stayed shut. The sea came back fast, pool by pool. The last crew worked knee-deep, then thigh-deep. The last basket went up on shoulders through climbing water. Dirge walked out of the yard behind them, sea to his hips. The arches sank back under the green glass, row by row. Maud met the sledges on the causeway and went basket to basket. Her hands moved bone by bone, quick and sure. She straightened up with the sea at her heels. A flight's worth, she said. 1 bloodline, clean. The tide shut the road behind the last sledge. Her 2 hours had held with nothing left on the sand but footprints. The herald stood on the causeway with his ledger open. 10 dragons at dawn, 10 at the turn. And this time he spoke his line out loud. A flight's worth of bones, 1 back from the sea. The seawall above us stood black with people. They had watched the whole fight without one sound. Now the sound came, and it was not a cheer. Half of it was, the other half wept. The Sea Chancellor stood at the ramp with her hood back. My whole life, that glow was a bedtime story, she said. Tonight it comes up my own causeway. The keeper stood at the rail and bowed his head to every sledge that passed. Old keeper words, too quiet to carry. The first sledge passed me on the ramp. Heat bloomed through the wool against my spine. Sledge by sledge, the shell burned warmer on my back. The keeper saw my face and nodded once. She was listening. Maud cut notch 11 at the causeway gate. 11 of 60, she said, and walked the staff down to the sand. I carried the first basket of tide bone down myself. We set the egg at the tide line facing the drowned yard. Its black crown steamed in the morning cold. The basket stood in rows behind it, pearl bright under lids. The whole city was on the walls before the wool came off. The keeper unwound the wrappings with his bandaged hands. Then he stopped, palms flat on the shell. "I'll say my doubt once," he said. The flight egg was born hungry. This one was born asleep. No keeper alive has ever seen her eat. Maud looked at the full baskets, then at me. "One way to learn," she said. If she didn't eat, the warmth was just a slow way of dying. I took the first bone from the basket, pearl bright, long as my arm, light as driftwood. I laid it against the black shell. For a breath, nothing. Another breath. Then heat rolled off the stone like an oven door swinging wide. A thin seam of light ran up the bone. The bone went to pale ash, and the ash ran in. The shell drank it and turned warmer under my hand. "She eats," the keeper said, and his voice broke saying it. The crews came down basket by basket. The keeper fed her next to me, palm for palm. He wiped each bone clean of sand before it went to the shell. He wept while he worked and never stopped working. After bone went to light and ash. Out past the sand, the morning ebb began to run. The last basket emptied as the sea pulled back. The shell stood darker now, drum tight, humming under the wool. And the letters rose off the crown, cold and clear. Lineage accepted, tide. Clutch, 10/12's tide. Maud read it out for the walls. 10 of 12, she called. Her count, the dead flights coming home. The city made one low sound, like a tide of its own. The herald wrote in his ledger without being asked. The court would want its asset counted. Then the shell moved. A seam of sea green light split it, crown to sand. Clean water ran out of it, bright as glass. And inside, something sang one note, high and rising. The seam opened a hand's width wider. She came out soaked, trailing light down the black shell. Sea green, kelp slick, no bigger than a house cat. She stood on new legs in the wet sand and kept singing. Behind her, the seam knit itself shut, black again. The keeper went down on his knees in the sand. "A she," he said. "Warden, a she." Every dragon I had ever hatched had been a he. Now the first daughter of the flight stood singing at the sea. I picked her up, and she weighed less than the bone had. She put her head under my jaw and sang on. On the wall towers, the brood answered her, one throat at a time. 10 voices came down off the stone. Her small one rose through all of them. I said her name loud enough for the walls. Tide song. The walls said it back until the salt terraces rang. The gray answered too. Out past the drowned yard, the deep water boiled. Sea drakes came up across the whole bay at once. Every drake the siege had left, rising toward the song. Boyd was already at the rail with his glass. "They're coming to her," he said. "All of them." Tide song turned in my arms toward the water. Her song climbed, note over note, like a horn call, and the ebb, already running, ran. Kai. The tide pilot's horn blew wild from the wall. The turn come far too early. The sea went out from under the gray like a pulled cloth. Whole lanes of bay turned to mud between wingbeats. Diving drakes hit flats where water had just been. They came down heavy, wings caught, sea gone from under them. All along the walls, Coldharbor leaned out to watch the bay dry. The oldest tide pilot hung off the wall stair, laughing. "The ebb was already running," he shouted. "She moved the clock, not the sea. The sea's doing the rest." And the brood ended the siege in the open. Squall dropped his storm on the stranded lines and pinned them flat. Red Maw burned one clean lane straight up the middle of the flats. Dirge and Great Bone walked the mud and finished what stood up. Onyx worked the soft ground like he was born in it. Verde Gree ran the tide pools down, one by one. Poor Ent, the fen drake, rolled one drake alive into a pool. He held it under his foot. Boyd's hunters shot the few that clawed back into the air. It was over before the mud dried at the edges. The bells went again, all across the stilt streets. By now, I knew which bells. Boyd glassed the wind off the sea, slow, twice. "Nothing gray on the wind," he said. "The bay is clean." The sea chancellor stood at the rail with her hood back. Her hands shook on the stone, and she let them. "One song and an ebb tide," she said. "The siege of Coldharbor died at low water." Dirge walked over to the fendrake's pool. He breathed his pale bonefire down through the water. By. The gray burned off the caught drake like scum off a pot. Under it lay a true sea drake, shallows, green, breathing slow. It floated in the pool, clean as the day it hatched. The walls cheered that hardest of all. Maud didn't cheer. "Pen it," she said, "and watch it." The oath came at the tide line, Coldharbor's way. "We don't kneel," the sea chancellor said. "Sailors who kneel drown." She led her captains into the surf to their boot tops. Each raised a fist of seawater and let it run out through their fingers. "Coldharbor to the warden of the flights," she said. "While the tide still turns. The second kingdom, sworn in its own sea, on its own rules." The keeper stood on the ramp and watched it with wet eyes. The herald wrote that down too. Then Boyd called from the drake pen, and his voice was wrong. The clean drake had turned within the hour. Gray crept back over the shallows, green starting at the skull. It spread like frost on a window while we watched. The drake thrashed the pool white and screamed at the sea. Dirge finished it fast and stood over it after, very still. Boyd lowered his glass and gave the verdict flat. The purge fails wherever the source's call reaches, and the call is spreading east, Maud set her jaw. Then the cure lives where the call lives, she said. West, at the root. The Sea Chancellor heard all of it, and when you march west, she said, they come creeping back to my walls. They will, Maud said, until the root dies. The Sea Chancellor nodded once like a woman pricing a storm. Then she sent her clerks running. Her payment came out in a chart chest, corners white with salt. Her clerks pinned the West Coast charts along the seawall rail. I read them and went cold in the sunlight. Stonecrown shore ran black from the border to the paper's far edge. Every black mark was a gray roost her pilots had logged. The marks never broke, cape after cape, all the way to the western mountains. Our road west threaded straight through the middle of them. The Sea Chancellor flattened the last chart with both hands. My riders follow the coast behind you. 40 days to the western mountains. By these charts. She tapped the black shore once. You won't be alone on that road, Warden. Not the whole way. Maud cut notch 12 at the next dawn. 12 of 60, she said, and the loading began. Coldharbor packed our sled like a daughter was leaving home. Salted fish, fresh wool for the shell, chart tubes and oiled leather. Children pressed shells and rope charms into the hunter's hands. Tide Song, the sea singer, rode the sled all day. She slept curled against the black shell she was born out of. Under the wool, that shell rode warmer than it had ever been. 10 wings woken now, and it had grown hotter with everyone. The fendrake swam the harbor lanes next to the causeway. When she woke, she sang down at him, and he rumbled back. The keeper checked the wrappings hour by hour, same as ever. Now he checked a sleeping hatchling, too. Maud cut notch 13 at the causeway gate. 13 of 60, she said, and shouldered the staff. The column stood formed on the causeway, pointed west. The brood held the morning sky over it in a slow wheel. Then the harbor horns blew a strange sail in. A sloop came around the seawall under an ivory pennant. A courier in stone-crowned silver came up the harbor stairs. He didn't bow to the Sea Chancellor, or to me. He broke a silver seal and read it where he stood. The regent will receive her egg and its bearer. No threat in it, no terms, an open door where a wall should have been. The keeper rubbed his burned palms and stared at the ivory pennant. She never receives, he said. She summons. I have stood in that hall. Stonecrown's regent was not barring her door against us. She was opening it. That was worse. Maud cut notch 14 at the borderstone. 14 of 60, she said, and shouldered the staff. I walked the column over the white chalk line myself. Stonecrown's toll house stood open on the far side. No bar, no guard, no smoke from the chimney. A cold kettle sat on a cold stove. Cups stood by it, washed and waiting. The keeper stared at them with his jaw tight. Good men kept this gate the night I ran, he said. They waved a thief through and wished him luck. He set the cup's mouth down and walked out. The herald wrote the hour we came onto Stonecrown ground. The court wanted its asset tracked to the mile. The road west ran through golden grass under a cobalt sky. For a mile it could have been the marches behind us. Then the first glass tree stood up out of the grass. Jewel blue, tall as a barn, clear as bottle glass. Sun went through it and came out blue on the road. Orange spore blooms grew thick in its shade. They glowed soft even at noon like coals under ash. Tide Song sat up on the sled and sang one note. The tree rang the note back, a half-breath late. The whole column stopped to hear a tree sing. Don't love it, the keeper said, not looking at it. That was an apple orchard when I rode east. The bloom takes root where the people stop. The prettier the country grows, the longer they've been gone. After that, I read the land his way. A whole hillside of glass trees ringing in the wind. Under it, a village with every door standing open, tables set, a forge with its tools laid out in rows. Boyd's hunters drew the well and found the water sweet. No graves, no burn marks, no blood on any floor. One house held a loom with cloth half made on it. The keeper touched the weave and stopped. Border work, he said. My mother wove this pattern. He walked out and went into no more houses. We took nothing and shut every door behind us. The people were gone, the way water leaves a cracked jar. The finest farmland I had ever seen, and nothing breathing on it but us. I tightened the column and doubled the guard on the sled. The keeper checked the wrappings, same as every hour. Under the wool, the shell rode warm and waiting. The gray came at midday out of the bloom itself. They rose from the orange ditches on both sides of the road. Ground drakes, gray to the bone, quiet as smoke. They came on together, in step, and that was new. I stood on the sled rail and called the fight. The gold champion folded off his point and hit the first rink. Squall dropped his wind flat and pinned the ditch line to the grass. Red Maw burned one clean lane through the blooms. Gree. The glass trees rang with the fight like a bell tower. Dirge walked the burned lane and finished what stood up. Great Bon held the road over the sled and never gave a step. One drake broke through and came up the wagon side. Tide Song shrieked. A basalt came down on it like a falling wall. Verdier, Gree, and Onyx rolled up the flanks between them. Boyd's hunters shot from the wagon rails steady as drill. It was over faster than the telling of it. Then the gray did a thing the gray never do. The living ones pulled off us all at once. No scatter, no rout. They formed one low line over the glass trees. They flew west together, wings even, like geese behind a leader. Boyd stood in his stirrups and watched them shrink. That's not a rout, he said. That's a recall. He had hunters on their trail before the dust settled. Maud walked the line and found nothing worse than scratches. We camped that night inside a ring of glass trunks. The brood sat down facing west without being told. Dirge stood the first watch, still as his own bones. At midnight, the keeper laid a palm on the wool. Hotter again, he said. Every night since the causeway, nobody made a joke about it. Maud cut notch 15 at dawn by a ringing orchard. 15 of 60, she said, and the column rolled west. Boyd's hunters caught us up at mid-morning, horses lathered. They had ridden the gray line's track through the night. The lead hunter knelt and drew it in the road dust. Every gray trail in the country bent onto one western road. Trails fed in from north and south, like streams to a river. The herald leaned over the drawing with his ledger open. How many roads west? He asked. One, the lead hunter said. They keep it like soldiers keep a road. Every den we passed stood empty. They're not spreading anymore, Warden. They're leaving. I gave their find to the whole column, loud. Boyd's hunters found the road the gray are keeping. The herald took their names into his ledger. Everyone. Boyd looked his hunters over once and nodded. From him, that was a parade. That evening, Boyd climbed a white chalk ridge with his glass. The west wind came over it steady and cold. He counted a long time and never lowered the glass. 200 wings on the west wind, he said. All of them riding one wind, one heading. Maud came up next to him with the staff. 40 wings the day we left the valley, she said. 200 now. She turned the staff so the cut side caught the light. And her warmth spends a notch a day, whatever flies. The herald wrote the count with a careful hand. The keeper pressed his burned palms together under his cloak. 100 years, the gray never went anywhere, he said. They only spread. Now they're going somewhere. I looked west along their line of flight. Mountains stood black against the last of the light. Our road ran at the same mountains. On the sled, Tidesong woke and stared west too. She pressed against the black shell and went quiet. Whatever was calling them, our road went there. That night, the sky never emptied. Wings went over the stars, west in loose lines. None of them turned for a camp full of dragonfire. Boyd kept his glass up until the moon set. We're not worth a turn of their heads, he said. Maud cut notch 16 in the morning cold. 16 of 60, she said, and set the pace herself. The last day's country was the richest and the emptiest. Vine terraces climbed the hills with no pickers on them. A mill wheel turned on a bright stream, grinding nothing. We passed a market town built for fair days. Stalls stood under glass trees grown up through the square. A land this rich should have choked the road with wagons. We rode the high street alone, hoofbeats loud as drums. Spore blooms lined the road like lamps nobody had lit. Glass trees stood over it all, ringing when the wind came. Tidesong sang back at them until Maud shushed her. She had already outgrown the basket. Coldharbor wove her. The keeper rode through his own country with his hood up. The road in ran white and straight between chalk cuts. We came over the last rise at sundown. Stonecrown's capital stood up white across the valley. Ivory stone, tower on tower, like a crown cut from salt. Hanging gardens spilled down every wall. Green gone feral. Wisteria hung purple over gates built for kings. Cold silver light lay over all of it. It was the most beautiful city I had ever seen. Home, the keeper said, and nothing else. Boyd swept his glass across it, wall to wall. Roost towers stood on every ward, old and huge and dark. Smoke rose from a few chimneys and all that stone. Gardens, gates, towers, and nothing moving over them. Not one dragon in its sky. Maud cut notch 17 under Stonecrown's gate. 17 of 60, she said, and grounded the staff. I led the column through the white arch myself. 10 dragons came over the wall in flying order. Their shadows ran down streets built for kings. The gold champion took the highest air and held it. The city stood open and nearly still. Ivory towers and almost no washing hung out to dry. Grass grew in the seams of the royal road. Hanging gardens spilled wild over silent courtyards. A school stood open with no voices inside. Every roost tower stood dark over its ward. Boyd rode with his eyes on those towers. Then the people came out. They stood in doorways and on garden walls, quiet. An old man held up a small carved wing. He held it the way men hold a church token. A girl ran the wall to keep pace with Dirge. Her mother pulled her down, then kept watching herself. Nobody cheered. They watched the sky like it owed them something. No wings over this city since before my grandfather's grandfather, the keeper said from under his hood. You ride in looking like the debt come due. Guards met us at the palace bridge. Polished steel, correct manners, too many spears. A steward read a welcome off a scroll. The words were warm. The spear count was not. The regent of Stonecrown will receive the warden tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. She had summoned us across a kingdom to wait. The valley's herald asked the steward for a fixed hour. He got a low bow and no hour. Maud leaned on the staff and smiled thin. Standing still spends a notch, same as marching, she said, and watching us spend it costs her nothing. They housed us in a guest tower on the west ward. I set the sled in the center room, both eggs wrapped. I put the keeper next to it, inside my own ring. Her law wanted his neck, and the city knew his face. Boyd set watches on every stair and window. Ingrid's soldiers took posts on the stairs under ours. The steward called it an honor guard. Boyd looked down the stairwell once. Honor doesn't usually block the door, he said. Squall took the tower top without being told. Greybone lay down across the courtyard gate. That message needed no scroll. By dusk, a quiet crowd stood on the walls below us. They hadn't come out for a warden. They came to watch dragons roost on their towers again. A woman set a lamp in her window, facing ours. Then another did. Then a whole street's worth. In the evening, the keeper stood at our window, hood down at last. He named the dark wards for me, roof by roof. I learned my letters under that glass roof, he said. My family kept the crypt under it before her family kept the throne. At midnight, the shell warmed the wool again. He checked the wrappings, same as every hour. Tide Song slept pressed against the sled runner. West past the walls, the ash country glowed faint orange. Maud cut notch 18 into the staff, right there on palace marble. 18 of 60, she said, loud enough for their guards. They took our blades at the hall door. Maud kept the staff. Nobody thought to ask about it. The throne hall ran long and pale under a glass roof. Roost galleries opened high along both walls. Arches wide enough for wings, swept clean and dark. Somebody still dusted perches for a flight long dead. Fewer courtiers stood there than the masons cut it for. Their silks were fine and their faces were careful. Ingrid stood in front of an empty throne. She ruled from the step under it. Gray dress, silver at the wrists, no crown. She looked harder than her letters, and twice as tired. Her eyes went to my empty hands first. "Where is my egg, Warden?" she said. "Warm," I said, and watched. My letter asked for my egg, and the thief who ran with it. "Your keeper burned his palms keeping that shell alive," I said. "He stays inside my ring." Her jaw set, and then she let it go. That surprised me. She had larger business than one man's neck. She made her offer standing, plain as a bill of sale. Hatch the egg here, under Stonecrown's crown. A keeper's wage, paid from her own treasury. The dark roost towers scrubbed and open for our wings. My title honored in every port she owned. "Your dragons would want for nothing," she said. "Neither would you." For one breath, she sounded like she meant it. Everything a warden could ask, except the egg ever leaving. The Valley's herald wrote the terms into his ledger. Every line he wrote priced 1 bar of a cage. Her summons had opened this door a kingdom ago. Now I stood in the room it led to. As she named her terms, Squall came off the tower. He set his weight down over the glass roof. The hall's light went storm dark, wall to wall. Half the court came up off its benches. Guards found their hilts, and then found no orders. Somewhere in the dark, a cup went over. Nobody laughed. Ingrid stopped. She looked up through the glass at a storm dragon's belly. Then she finished her terms in the dark. "I gave her that much," her voice held. "I didn't call him down. I declined nothing yet," I said. "Show me the crypt where the egg lay." The hall went quieter than the stormlight. "No," Ingrid said. The word landed before any reason did. "The crypt is sealed. Family ground." Maud's thumb stopped moving on the staff. All that palace and one door in, Ingrid guarded with her own voice. The refusal was the tell. Ingrid came down the steps, one at a time. She stopped close, where the court would see only calm. "Our crypt kept the pair's law even after it lost the pair," she said. "As the mother wakes, the maker sleeps. Mine stirred the night my keeper ran. 60 days it has been waking, one wing at a time." She let it sit. Stormlight crawled over the pale stone. "And your count stopped at 9, didn't it?" I kept my hands open at my sides. Since the tally, only Maud had known the forge went cold. Cord back home believed I could hatch dragons forever. Across the hall, Maud held the staff like a fence post. Ingrid's whole offer stood on that cold forge. 10 dragons, Warden, Ingrid said. "That is all you will ever have, unless you hatch mine, in my house, under my seal." Walls shifted, and the dark went a shade deeper. I answered the hall, not just Ingrid. "Keep your crypt sealed," I said. "I'll keep my count the same way." "My offer stands while the shell is warm," she said. "So does my letter." Squall lifted from the roof as we walked out. Daylight dropped back into the hall like something spilled. On the bridge, Maud matched my step. "Since the tally, that count was mine to keep," she said. "Now Stonecrown's regent keeps it too." "She learned it from a law in a sealed room," I said. "Then the room is the lesson," Maud said. "Sealed rooms don't teach counting for free. Boyd met us at the tower with the day's watch. Ingrid's riders had drilled in the yard since morning, not forming up to march, waiting. That evening I stood the first watch on the sled myself. Boyd worked his glass along the western dark. Below, her honor guard changed shifts by torchlight. The keeper came up the tower stairs at a run. He rolled a strip of hide flat on the table. Keeper's marks, drawn small, passes, yards, waystones. The lines climbed north into the high passes. His family's road, not the crown's. Every waystone carried a keeper's mark cut next to it. Shelter, water, ground his family held rights to. The frost yard, he said, and set a burned finger on it. She'll have riders on every road out of this city, Boyd said. I've stolen from her once already, the keeper said. The frost yard is keeper ground, my family's charge, not her garrison's. She'll watch. She won't spend the soldiers she needs for her own walls. Boyd turned back to the window. Then come count what she's not spending them on, he said. Down in the ash country, lights moved, files of them, spaced even, all bearing west. Not torches, nothing living camps in that country at night. The gray, walking in order, like pilgrims on a road. No fires answered them anywhere in the dark. Tidesong climbed to the sill and stared west too. She didn't sing at these lights. Boyd held the glass on them a long time. They walked last night too, he said. Everything out there is going to one place. Their road and the keeper's route bent for the same mountains. On the sled, the wool moved with the shell. The keeper laid a burned palm on it and went still. Faster, he said. Faster every night now. I put my own hand next to his. Against the sled, the egg beat faster. I took the sled's lead rope at Stonecrown's west gate. Maud cut notch 19 into the staff by the arch. 19 of 60, she said, and shouldered it. Ingrid's guards lined the bridge and let us pass. Their captain counted our column with his lips moving. 10 dragons went up the valley in flying order. Tidesong walked next to the sled, matching its pace. At Coldharbor, she had hatched the size of a house cat. Now her shoulders stood level with the rail, pony high. Frost formed on her sea-green scales, and she ignored it. The keeper led us off the crown road at a leaning boundary stone. Ingrid's riders reined in at that stone. They sat their horses in a row and watched us climb. Keep her ground, the keeper said. Her soldiers stop here, her eyes won't. The road cut up through blue-white ice fields. Deep indigo shadow filled every gully. The keeper touched the mark on each waystone as he passed it. His burned fingers knew the grooves without looking. That night, the sky glowed pale green over the peaks. The shell steamed against its wool in the cold. The keeper checked the wrappings on the hour, same as always. Hotter, he said each time, quieter each time. Under the same wool, the cold egg kept its silence. I put my hand on it anyway before I slept. Maud cut notch 20 into the staff at a frozen waystone. 20 of 60, she said, and blew on her hands. Before noon, a lone rider came up our tracks. Boyd's hunters walked him in with his hands shown empty. He carried one scroll under Stonecrown's crown seal. The keeper broke the seal and read it, standing in the wind. The paper named him traitor to the crown he had served. It stripped his title and scratched his name off the keeper rolls. And my family's charge goes to the crown, he said, flat. A traitor's neck belongs to any stone-crown blade, Boyd said, and doubled the watch around him. The keeper read the paper twice, front to back, then his shoulders came down, loose, like a man out of harness. He pulled a cord over his head. A disc of old lead swung in the cold. The keeper's seal, worn smooth by his family's thumbs. He pressed it into the courier's glove. Carry it back to her, he said. Then he turned to me, bare-necked in the wind. She has taken the seal so I can finally open the book. From under his coat, he drew an oilcloth bundle. Inside sat a hide-bound book, thick as a brick. The keeper's mark was branded on the cover. Maud leaned on the staff and eyed it. That thing rode shut under your coat since the coast, she said. The seal's oath kept it shut, he said. Her writ just killed the oath. He wrapped it again and stowed it against his chest. The road down is long enough for reading. First, the dead. Boyd watched the courier shrink down the white slope. Her own paper just cut his tongue loose, he said. Somebody should tell her what she paid for. Maud cut notch 21 into the staff at first light. 21 of 60. We went over the last rise before midday. The frost yard lay in a bowl under a wall of blue ice. Stone grave mounds stood in straight rows under the snow. A keeper's mark topped every headstone in the yard, and the gray sat in the middle of the graves. Gray drakes, packed shoulder to shoulder between the rows. Frost grew on their backs like fur. They made no sound at all. They held still, the way the stones held still. Above the yard, a black vent opened in the ice wall. Shapes moved inside it, slow, out of the light. Over the vent hung a snow shelf broad as a keep's roof. Boyd bellied down on the ridge with his glass. Sky's empty, he said. First clean wind in 2 kingdoms, because they're all down there. He tracked the glass along the rows below. The gray walk west. Every file we've glassed walks west. He passed me the glass without looking away. These stopped on graves. I looked at the keeper. He looked at the yard and said nothing at all. Behind us, the wool moved against the sled ropes. The shell beat like a heart with the yard in sight. Whatever lay down there, she wanted it home. I kept the plan to 3 strokes. Red Maw takes the shelf. Verdigris, Onyx, the graves. Everyone else holds the rows off their backs. The keeper flattened his hide map on a rock. He set a burned finger on one long row. This row, no other. Brad. 1 flight, 1 row, nothing mixed. My family buried them sorted. Boyd looked from the graves to him. You're sure they'll forgive the digging? Boyd said. We'd buried them to keep them safe, the keeper said. Not to keep them. Red Ma went first, low along the ice wall. He dragged ember fire along the root of the shelf. The root glowed orange, then let go all at once. The shelf dropped in one white sheet. The boom hit our chests up on the ridge. Snow smoke rolled across the yard, wall to wall. When it thinned, the vent was gone. A white hill stood where the nest mouth had been. The gray outside came off the graves as one pack. Boyd's hunters fired down from the ridge in turns. Greatbone dropped into the yard's gap and shut it like a gate. Squall flattened the first rush with one wing of storm wind. Sturgey walked the outer row and burned whatever got through. Behind that line, Verdigris peeled the frozen ground back in sheets. Onyx cut under the mounds and lifted them whole. One gray broke the line and made for the sled. Buzzsalt met it head-on and drove it into the rock. The digging never stopped behind him. Bone came up blue-white and clean. Rotted banners still wrapped the long bones. Buried with rites, every grave of them. The keeper walked the open row with his hood down. He said one short word over every open stone. On the ridge, his hunters held foreign ground like home ground. Boyd called the yard clear before the snow smoke settled. The last gray dropped between the rows and stayed down. Real snow began falling through the thinning smoke. We brought the sled in between the grave rows. I unwrapped the second egg in the falling snow. Its black shell steamed in the open air. The cold egg rode next to it under the same wool. The keeper held out his burned palms for the first bones. I set the frost bones across them myself. He laid them at the base of the shell. For one breath, nothing moved but the snow. Then the shell drank them the way it had at Coldharbor. Her dead she takes home, Maud said, watching. Kills, she refuses. These were mourned, these are hers. Light ran under the black shell like wind over coals. Collie lineage accepted. Frost, clutch, 11 twins 12. Count the dead flights coming home, 11 of 12. The shell opened along a seam of white light. A whelp climbed out into the falling snow. Blue-white, the size of a house cat, steady on the ice. Snow landed on his back and stayed there, not melting. His first breath rolled out as a plume of frost. He set his feet wide and looked up at the ice wall. Snowdrift, I said. Along the ridge, Boyd's hunters came up off their bellies. They pulled their hoods down, bareheaded in the wind. Not one of them made a sound. Then one laughed, short, half a sob. The sound carried across the whole white bowl. The keeper went down on both knees in the snow. Snowdrift walked through the grave rows straight to him. He sniffed the burned palms and leaned his weight into them. My family has been apologizing for 100 years, the keeper said. His voice cracked in the middle of it. Tide Song put her head over the sled and watched them, two of her mother's clutch, breathing the same snow. Boyd came down off the ridge, glass still in hand. 11 of 12, he said. One flight left and a book to read. The keeper stood and settled the bundle against his chest. Down the mountain, he said. Every page. We camped that night among the closed graves. Snowdrift slept pressed to the warm shell. At first leg we started down, Snowdrift riding the sled. Maud cut notch 22 at the edge of the grave rows. 22 of 60, she said, and turned the staff downhill. At the first bend, Boyd put up his glass and went still. Ingrid's riders sat the pass road far below us. One long line, drawn up, glass flashing at their end of it. Their lead rider held something flat, and his hand moved across it. They didn't come up. They didn't turn back either. Not attacking, Boyd said, and lowered the glass, counting. I slowed the column to a riding walk on the switchbacks. Read, I told the keeper. We don't stop for it. He brought his horse in next to the sled. He rode knee to knee with the two eggs. Maud cut notch 23 into the staff at first light. 23 of 60, she said, and rode with the staff across her knees. High on her left, Ingrid's riders kept pace along the ridgeline. Boyd glassed them once and went back to his sky. The keeper unwrapped the oilcloth across his saddle horn. A hide cover creaked open in the cold. The first page carried the old king's crown in cracked black wax. Keeper marks ran under the crown, row after row, 100 years deep. The keeper set a burned finger under the top row. Stonecrown had its own flight once, he said. Frostline, born to the passes we just left. Hoofbeats filled the pause. And the mother egg sat cold in the crypt. The old king wanted it lit in his lifetime. A winged shadow slid over the page, Squall running his high circuit above the road. The keeper let the shadow pass before he went on. So the king used the sky he already had, he said. He butchered the frost flight, living dragons, his own. He turned the page and pinned it flat against the wind. He fed them to her shell-like graves. Behind him, the warm egg knocked against the sled rail. One hard beat, then another. She was listening again. On the sled, Snowdrift slept against the warm shell, house cat small. The butchered flight, 2 days old and breathing. Maud looked at the whelp and not at the book. Her dead she takes home, she said. Kills, she refuses. Every bone, the keeper said. She refused him every bone. He dumped them in a pit at his own yard. Murdered, unburied, no rights. The road dropped through a stand of glass blue trees. What rose out of that pit was the first of the gray, he said. The hollowing is the refusal. It always was. Boyd rode 2 paces with that, then spat down slope. That's why they sat those graves in the passes, he said. Even the gray keep their dead. The keeper nodded once and turned the page. Boyd's arm came up on the flank. A file of the gray walked a far slope, headed west, packed close. They never turned their heads toward us. 100 years walking, Boyd said, and still not there. I watched the file top the ridge and drop away. Then I checked the sled ropes because my hands wanted to jop. Tide Song paced the sled with her head low, watching the wool. We came down out of the ice country all morning. The land opened into ash-glass hills, jewel-blue trees, orange blooms. Pretty country, and not one chimney smoking in it. Maud cut notch 24 at first light by a frozen ford. 24 of 60, she said. All that day the keeper kept 1 page pinned under his thumb. He was saving it, and I was done waiting. Say it plainly, I said. Why did mine stop? He opened the page on his saddle horn and held it out. 2 eggs, drawn inside 1 ring of marks. The mother's pair, he said. Flight egg and mother egg, made together. 1 job, worked from both ends. I arse people as the justice wrote a moment with his palm flat on the drawing. The flight egg returns the lines that came home to its own yard, he said. 9 lay in the valley. The 3 that died abroad answer only her. The words came down one at a time, hoofbeat by hoofbeat. 9 had hatched out of my egg. Its half of the work had ended, not broken, finished. Maud reined in half a stride, then caught back up. The valley gate, she said. The shells touched on the sled and the warm one flared. I stood right there with no name for it. It greeted its pair, the keeper said. We're done, and its twin come to carry the rest home. I put my bare hand on the cold shell. I kept it there through the whole next switchback. Since the 9th hatch, I had carried that silence like a fault. Relief came, and I let it stay. Maud pulled her roost charter from its tube one-handed. She spread it against the staff, page against page. 13 flight marks ran down her sheet in Old Valley ink. She read her own handwriting for a long moment. The valley wrote down the half it could see, she said. Forged to rebuild the flights? That's what a contingency looks like when you've forgotten it's a mother. She said it to the page, not to us. Then she rolled the charter loose, ready at hand. Great. The road flattened, and I lifted the column to a canter. Boyd's flank riders spread wide and matched the pace. The keeper held the book open against the wind. Maud brought her charter in, knee to knee with his book. The book's clutch roll ran 13 lines under the crown seal. Her page ran 13 marks in valley ink. Line for line, mark for mark, the 2 agreed, and the shell had already given its count in the falling snow. 11 of 12 home, her count, the dead flights coming home, 1 flight left. Boyd leaned in from the flank, glass hanging off his fist. Her page, his book, her shell, he said. 3 counts, 1 story. The Gold's line sat alone on both pages. 13 flew, and only his line carried no grave mark. He never died, so she never counted him. Far ahead, the Gold champion ran point, catching the low sun. I watched him hold his line above the road. Some counts a dragon should be glad to miss. Maud cut notch 25 into the staff at first light. 25 of 60, she said, and pointed it down the road. The keeper turned to the last leaf and flattened it. A drawn map filled the page, mountains inked in a western wall. A ringed yard sat in the middle of the range. The cradle, he said, the old king's butchering yard in the western mountains. He touched the ring with his burned finger. The glass flight died at its door, the first flight that ever fought the hollowing. Maud's jaw set hard. My charter's west corner is a scorch, she said. I copied that scorch for years, faithful as a clerk. He burned the cradle off every charter he could reach, the keeper said. The keepers kept the one he couldn't. He shut the map with both hands. 1 map left in the world. It rode against my chest since the night I fled. Boyd swung his glass west along the far slopes. Another file of the gray walked the skyline, same heading. Every file we've glassed walks west, he said. They're walking to the cradle, same road as us. I looked from the map to the mountains and back. The last flight lay in that ringed yard. So did the end of every gray road in the west. 1 yard, I said, her last flight, and all of them. The warm shell knocked the rail again, twice. On the ridge, Ingrid's riders broke their long patience. The lead rider held his flat board high, hand moving fast. Then the line split down its middle, half-wheeled north and went at a full gallop. The rest sat their horses and watched us run. Boyd tracked the galloping half until the ridge took them. They counted pages, not dragons, he said. She'll know that book is open by dark. I sent Squall wide behind us to watch the road. He went up in 1 storm-dark spiral and leveled off. The keeper buckled the book inside his coat. Finish it tonight, I said, out loud, at the fire. Every ear in this column. Every page, he said. It stayed shut long enough. That night he read by the fire with the sled at his back. Boyd's hunters sat in a ring with their hoods down. He read the marks his family had cut for 100 years. Graves tended in secret. Apologies nobody living had ever heard. Snowdrift slept against the warm shell while his flight story ran past him. The shell stayed hot against the wool through the whole reading. She heard every word of it. Nobody asked the keeper to stop, and he didn't. At first light, Maud cut notch 26 into the staff. 26 of 60, she said, and turned the staff west. Boyd stood on a rock with his glass on the north skyline. Thin smoke columns stood off the pass line, straight in the cold air. Signal fires, he said, both ends of the passes. Ingrid's shutting them behind us. The keeper settled the book against his chest. She knows what I've read, he said. She'll close every door in her kingdom before we reach the last one. I looked west, where the road ran at the mountains. Then it's a race, I said. We ride for the cradle. Chains hung on the river town's grain doors by mid-morning. I rode the wharf line and pulled up at the tall doors. Every door carried the same fresh wax, stamped with Stonecrown's crown. A grain line stood in front of the doors and didn't move. Townsfolk held sacks that hung empty. Her own people, locked out with us. A dog worked the spilled grain between the boards. The wharf master stood by his own chained doors. Regent's order, he said. Nothing sails west. Nothing floats west. Across the river, the ferry sat roped to the far bank. Boyd came down the tower stairs with his glass folded. Bridge gate is down, he said. Same wax on the winch. Maud had cut notch 27 at first light. She held the staff up now. 27 of 60 stood in the wood. She isn't chasing us, she said. She's starving the road. The keeper walked his horse in next to mine. Count what's missing, he said. Not one pike on that bridge. Not one soldier at these doors. He tipped his head toward the sled. She doesn't need an army. She shuts her doors and stands behind them. 60 days is her whole war. I set my palm flat on the warm shell. It beat against my hand, strong and even, steady and spending. Then why not end it with one sentence, I said. Tell every crown my own forge went cold at 9. The keeper kept his eyes on the sealed doors. Because saying aloud how eggs die invites the question of how eggs are killed, he said. Her house cannot survive the follow-up. Boyd spat off the wharf into the brown water. Maud turned the staff over in both hands. So she waits us dead behind clean paper, she said. Then we answer her with paper, I said. Her own demand, handed back to her. Boyd looked up from wiping his glass. She wanted the egg opened on Stonecrown soil, I said. Granted, it opens at the cradle. No ground in her kingdom is more Stonecrown than that grave. Maud frowned at the staff, doubting Stonecrown's regent would ever ride out for talk. But with both walls watching and a herald reading, she could not stay home from that. I cut a green branch and called up one of Boyd's hunters. The West Pass Gate, I told him. A truce parley. In the open, both banners standing. The Valley Herald reads the terms. He rode for the ridge with the branch held high. The herald watched him go, then looked at me. The court sent me west to count its asset, he said. You'll count clauses instead, Maud said. We rode for the gate all the next day. Maud cut notch 28 at first light on the road. 28 of 60 stood in the wood. 32 left, and she pointed the staff west. At dusk, the West Pass Gate stood up out of the shadow. A wall ran across the whole pass, tower to tower. Her garrison lined it, spears at rest, nobody moving. Under the towers, the great gate stayed shut. We camped on the flat in plain sight of the wall. Squall held a high circle over the camp until full dark. The warm egg knocked at the sled rail half the night. She could feel the mountains on the far side. At first light, Maud cut notch 29. 29 of 60 stood in the wood. She planted the staff by the sled. By mid-morning, horns sounded behind the wall. A side gate opened, and Ingrid rode out in front of her riders. Pale horse, silver riding coat, no crown anywhere on her. She rode like the wall was still at her back. Her riders held back in the wall's shadow. She reined in one horse length from the herald's mark. You ride my roads with my egg and my traitor, Stonecrown's regent said, and you send me a green branch. I kept one hand on the sled rail. Maud stood at my left with the staff planted. I sent you your own letter, I said. You demanded the egg open on Stonecrown soil. I grant it. It opens at the cradle. The words ran along her riders like wind through barley. Ingrid sat very still on the pale horse. Behind me, the shell knocked the rail twice. The cradle is a grave, she said. The cradle is your ground, I said. Your letter asked for 2 things back. You'll have an answer on both before we're done here. Squall's shadow slid over the truce ground and kept going. Ingrid watched it pass before she spoke again. A wager then, she said. Set the terms where both walls can hear them. We wrote them out at a camp table between the lines. Ingrid set one term herself, her voice level. If she does not rise, the shell comes home to me, and that book burns. Write it, I said. The Valley Herald took the finished page and walked out alone. He gave it his verdict voice, the one whole courts hold still for. 3 clauses sealed by both banners. 1. The egg opens at the cradle on Stonecrown soil. 2. If the mother rises, the keeper's book is read to every crown, and Stonecrown stands absolved by its own confession. 3. If she does not rise, the shell returns to Ingrid, and the book burns. He rolled the page and held it up to both sides. Nobody spoke against a clause. Along the wall, her garrison passed the terms man to man. Maud counted them off against the staff with her thumb. 1 yard, she said. 1 reading, 1 fire. The keeper stepped into the open before anyone called his name. A wager this size needs a hostage her law will trust, he said. He looked at Ingrid, then back at me. Her law gets its keeper. You get the passes. He set the book in the herald's hands with both of his. The compact's instrument, he said. And Clause 3's kindling, if she wins it. Her captain brought out iron stamped with the keeper's own family mark. They closed on his burned wrists in front of both lines. Snawdrift called from the sled, one thin note. The keeper didn't turn around. Maud laid her hand flat on the whelp until he settled. Clause 2, I told the keeper. Every crown. You'll stand there and hear it read. Then ride fast, Warden, he said. He walked to her line on his own feet. The irons rang once with each step. Nobody in her line cheered. Ingrid read the page over twice, top to bottom. Refusing it now, in front of her own wall, would give the guilt a shape and a name. She pressed her seal into the wax with no wasted motion. Absolved, Ingrid said, like a coin she was biting. Stonecrown grants the road west. The cradle will settle what you are. Horns sounded along the wall, tower to tower. The great gate began to grind open, booming in its towers. The warm shell drummed at the rail as the gate moved. She wanted west. She had always wanted west. Her garrison leaned over the wall to watch the column stir. Boyd stood close at my shoulder. Both banners had watched her seal it. The wager belonged to everybody now. I looked at the open gate and nodded Ingrid. Half of me stayed on her hands anyway. That night I stood first watch, with Boyd above the camp. Past midnight he touched my arm and handed me the glass. Down on the interior road, wagons moved with no lanterns. Low wagons, tarped, teams doubled, riding heavy on their axles. At the ford, the loads shifted under the tarps. Chain! Heavy chain, ringing link on link, a lot of it. Those left her vaults tonight, Boyd said. Running west by the Bally Road, iron doesn't leave a vault for grain. I lined their march up against the stars. Same heading as ours. The cradle. She had sealed 3 clauses in daylight. And sent iron west in the dark. Boyd pressed a thumb line onto the Sea Chancellor's chart. Glass them every night they move, I said. I want to know that road better than she does. At dawn, the column walked under the towers and through. The sled ran in the column's heart, both eggs wrapped tight. Snawdrift rode the wool with his nose against the warm shell. Behind us, the great gate ground shut, boom by boom. On the far side, Maud stopped and cut the staff. 30 of 60, she said, and held the staff up for the column. 30 notches stood in the wood. Half the warmth was gone. Maud said nothing else. The staff said it for her. 1 flight left to wake, I said. 1 egg to open, both at the cradle. Behind us, every door in her kingdom had closed. Ahead, the road ran straight at the western mountains. The passes stood open one way now. West, I spread the Sea Chancellor's chart flat on the sled rail. Black ink crusted the whole western shore of it. Every black smear on that page was a roost. 1 clean thread ran between the smears coast to mountains. I set my finger on the thread. That's our road, I said. Maud cut notch 31 at first light. 31 of 60 stood in the wood. Boyd folded the chart down to saddle size. The Sea Chancellor drew us a needle, he said. Then we ride the needle, I said. Column swung onto the coast road before the dew dried. By noon, we had company on both sides. Files of the gray walked the ridgelines, all heading west. More files worked the stream beds under the road. A wing-broken drake dragged itself through the golden grass. It passed a spear length from Boyd's stirrup. Its head never turned. Not one head turned, all day. Great Bond walked the column's flank instead of flying. The files parted around him and closed behind him. The brood flew low and swallowed their calls. Nobody in the column spoke over a whisper. Near the coast, gray sea drakes came up out of the surf. They shook off the water and joined the files. Nothing fought over rank, nothing fed, they just walked. After dark I watched them from the picket line. The files kept walking through the night. No camps, no rest. They're not sparing us, Boyd said. Glass up. We're just not the thing calling them. Maud watched a file ford the river north of us. Everything out here walks where we walk, she said. The same place the egg is going. I put my palm flat on the warm shell. The heat rose to meet my hand. Letters rose with it, soft as breath. She hears them. She hears them. Maud read it over my shoulder. She looked at the files on the ridge, then at the shell. She hears them, Maud said. The way a mother hews crying through a wall. I kept my palm on the shell a long moment. Tender and wrong, both at once. Then I took my hand back and called the pace. The staff took 4 more notches, dawn by dawn. 35 of 60 stood in the wood. That morning Boyd climbed a chalk knob with his glass. He swept the whole sky in one slow circle. Then he lowered the glass and swept it again. He came down slower than he went up. Count's empty, he said. First time ever. No birds left in the sky west of the passes. Nothing flies here that isn't gray. I looked up and saw what he meant. The sky held wings from rim to rim. Every one of them was gray. No gulls off the coast, not even crows. Boyd hung the glass on his chest like it weighed more now. Write it on the chart, I said. He wrote it small next to the black smears. Each night he found Ingrid's chain wagons too. They ran the interior road by dark lamps coal. They held our pace. Road for road, ridge for ridge. Boyd pressed a fresh thumb line onto the chart each midnight. Iron still riding west, he said. Patient iron. I checked his line against ours and said nothing. The wagons could wait. The staff couldn't. At notch 44, the road bent inland through fen country. Black pools stitched the low ground, home water. And the fen drake rolled in every pool he could reach. He came up dripping and pleased with himself. Tide Song, the sea singer, sang 2 notes at him from the bank. That evening I walked the brood line with a torch. I ran my hand down the fen drake's neck. I found it under the 3rd scale back from his jaw. A fleck of gray, small as a barley grain. I scraped it with my thumbnail. It didn't lift. It wasn't mud and it wasn't paint. My hands went cold before my head caught up. I called dirge with 1 whistle. The bone wyvern came over the wagons in 2 beats. He set his muzzle by Torrent's jaw and breathed. Pale fire walked the scale line, slow and thorough. The fleck dimmed under the fire. It did not go. Dirge breathed again, longer. The fleck stayed, dim and small, and there. Maud stood at my elbow with the torch. The purge fails wherever the source's call reaches, she said. We're standing inside the call now. Holding is all any fire does this deep. The fen drake held still through all of it. The sea singer pressed her head against his shoulder. He was the calm one of the 2. From that nightfall we kept a new ritual. Every dusk, Dirge walked 2 dragons through bonefire. The gold champion came first and came unasked. He had carried the gray once and burned clean. Now he stood the fire every night next to Torrent, the purged one and the flecked one, side by side. Until the source dies, Maud said. They walk it every night. The rest of the brood settled in a ring to watch. Squall grumbled thunder somewhere up in the dark. Boyd marked the ritual's hour on his chart with the rest. The column learned to set camp around the fire's light. The hunters started calling it the warding hour. I stood through every one of them with my hand on Torrent's jaw. His breathing stayed deep and even under my palm. I learned that breathing the way Maud knew her staff. I carried 3 clocks west after that. Days of warmth on the staff, gray wings on the wind, and a fleck the size of a barley grain under 1 scale checked every dusk. Each dusk it was still a fleck. Each dusk bought only that dusk. The staff took its notches. The mountains stood up out of the haze, closer each dawn. The files of the gray thickened as the ground rose. In the narrow country they walked shoulder to shoulder. Our road and their road braided into 1 road. Boyd stopped counting wings. There was no counting that. At notch 50 the coast road cut through a canyon. Chalk walls, a floor wide enough for 2 wagons. Half the column was inside when the gray turned. 19 days, and not 1 head had turned. In the canyon, every head turned at once. Files poured over both rims like water finding a hole. I stood up on the sled rail and called it. Great Bon over the sled. Squall, the rims, Dirge the floor. Great Bon planted himself over both eggs, wings wide. Maud got under his chest with the staff in both fists. The warm shell drummed at the rail between his feet. Squall raked the north rim with wind and thunder. Gray bodies tumbled down the chalk face. Dirge's fire walked the canyon floor in lines. Red Maw and Ver de Gris held the wagon gaps. The hunters shot from the wagon beds calm and steady. Torrent fought at the sled's wheel and never left it. The fen drake hit anything that came inside his circle. Cassis. Behind us, the canyon mouth went dark with bodies. The gray poured for the mouth to bottle us in. I turned and found the youngest one already looking at me. Snowdrift, pony size now, too big for the sled he'd ridden out of the passes. The mouth, I said, seal it. He went low over the column, over the rear guards' heads. At the mouth he braked, hung, and breathed. Frost sheeted rock to rock in 1 white plain. It thickened while we watched. A wall, a barn door thick. The gray hit the ice and slid down it. More hit it. The wall held. The frost line's first warwork stood there, holding the whole canyon shut. We ran the column out the west end into open ground. Boyd's hunters cheered him from the wagon beds by name. Snowdrift landed next to the sled, wings still open. Counted his, I said, loud, for the whole column. The frost line's first wall, Snowdrift's wall. Maud cut the staff at first light. 50 of 60, she said, holding it up. 50 notches stood in the wood. 10 days of warmth left. 2 dawns to the Cradle Valley, Boyd said, chart open. By the Sea Chancellor's own thread. The fleck stayed a fleck at that dusk's fire, and at the next dusk's, Maud cut notch 51, then 52. On that second evening, the road climbed a last ridge. I rode up expecting dark country. Every soul in the column stopped at the top. The valley below us burned with color in the night. Glass trees stood in ranks, cobalt and amber and rose. Light moved inside them like slow lightning. Violet blooms glowed in drifts along the valley floor. Rivers of the gray walked down into all that light. They didn't slow at the edge. They walked in like men coming home from a war. The warm shell drummed against the sled rail, fast and hard. Maud planted the staff next to me. 52 cuts stood in the wood. 100 years of walking, she said. This is where all of it was going. Boyd lowered the glass and didn't lift it again. Prettiest place I've ever glassed, he said. That's the wound, Maud said. The prettiest place in her whole story is the wound. I looked down at the light until my eyes ached. 8 days of warmth stood on the staff. The last flight slept somewhere under all that color. We started down. We came down into the glass at first light. I walked point with dirge, 10 strides ahead of the sled. The first tree stood taller than a barn. I put my bare hand flat on the trunk. Warm cobalt glass and something pale set deep inside. A wing bone, long as a ship's mast, fused into the glass. I walked around the trunk and found more. Finger bones fanned out where the branches began. A small skull sat whole in the amber crown. Morning light moved through glass and bone alike. "It's not a forest," I said. "It's them." Maud came up next to me with the staff. She looked into the amber crown a long time. "The glass flight," she said. "The first flight that died fighting the hollowing. The bloom grew up through where they fell." Boyd turned in a slow circle, glass lowered. Every tree in sight held its own pale bones. Ranks of them ran out of sight, cobalt and amber and rose. "A whole flight," he said, still standing where it fell. The warm shell drummed against the sled rail. She knew whose yard this was. Maud cut the staff. 53 of 60 stood in the wood. 7 days of warmth, she said. Start the sort. Coldharbor's drowned yard had taught us this work. Maud set the rule out loud, same as that first sort. "One bloodline a meal," she said. "A single stray bone, and she refuses everything." The catch glittered in every trunk. Pure glass bone lay fused with plague glass in the same wood. The pure bone sat pale and clean in the color. The plague glass ran through it in gray veins, like bad ore. One gray vein in the wrong basket lost us everything. I set the teams before the dew dried. Verdigris and onyx cut the seams, the frost yard work again. Hopper claws and mire claws, working a hand apart. Red maul warmed each trunk until it split along the grain. The hunters carried every freed bone on stretched canvas. Maud met each skull at the trestles herself. She laid the bones straight, the way she had since the boneyard. She kept her old burial words over every single one. No bone got stacked. Every bone got laid. They fought for everyone, she said. They get carried like it. Dirge walked the trestle rows behind her, slow. He set his muzzle to every doubtful basket. Whatever he turned his head from went back for a second cut. Nothing got past the bone wyvern twice. Each clean bone that hit the canvas got an answer. The warm shell knocked once against the sled rail. She was counting with us. Gray files walked past our work all day. They came down the valley in lines and never looked. Once a file walked straight through the trestle rows. Every hunter froze with a bone in his hands. The gray threaded the baskets like fence posts and walked on. Nobody breathed until the last tail was gone. Great Bond stood over the sled through all of it. Not one head turned toward the eggs. They walked for the heart of the valley, all of them. Boyd followed one file with his glass. "Same floor," he said. "Every line ends at the same floor." Maud cut notch 54 at first light, then 55. The sort filled the wagon beds, basket by basket. Each dusk, Dirge kept the warding hour, same as always. The gold champion stood the fire first, unasked. Poor Ent, the fendrake, stood it next to him. The fleck stayed a fleck under my thumb. Each dusk still bought only that dusk. On the second night, Boyd came down off a bone pile. "Ingrid's wagons stand on the north rim," he said. "Lamps cold. Iron's watching us work." I looked at the black rim, then back at the trestles. Stonecrown's regent could watch all she liked. The staff wasn't waiting on iron, and neither was I. At notch 56, the cutting reached the valley's heart. The glass trees stopped at a ring of open ground. Past them lay a stone floor wide as a parade field. Old burn scars stained it black, 100 years old. Iron rings stood in rows, set deep into the stone. Each ring was wide enough to collar a dragon's neck. Maud stood at the edge and would not step on it. "The butchering yard," she said. "The old king's floor." The keeper's book said it plain. The gray files walked onto that floor from every side. They walked to the middle and went down. Cracks split the stone there, wide as wagon gates. File after file stepped down into the dark and was gone. Boyd glassed the cracks from a bone pile until dusk. "Everything goes down," he said. "Nothing comes back up." That evening, the floor breathed. I felt it through my boots at the yard's edge. A long swell, then a long fall, slow as sleep. I walked out onto the stone with Maud and a torch. We lay flat at the widest crack and looked down. The torchlight fell on gray, not a crowd of gray. One gray. Bodies pressed into bodies, wing into flank, past telling apart. A wing joint the size of a house rolled over, slow. Gray skin had grown over whole files like candle wax. The whole mass rose and fell with that sleeping breath. Everything the West had lost was down there, not gathered, fused, being built. Maud looked down until the torch shook in her fist. "They were never gathering," she said. "They're a body. One body, big enough to hold a century." She pushed herself up off the stone with the staff. She stood in the middle of the old king's floor. "The flights the old king butchered," she said. She turned them from her door, and they never stopped trying to come home. Boyd backed away from the crack, white to the lips. "Then what is it?" he said. "What do we call a thing like that?" Maud set the staff down on the burned stone. 100 years of the hollowed wearing one crown, she said. The hollow king. I stood up and looked back at the trestles. The last flight lay clean in the baskets behind me. Then we don't stop cutting, I said. Lights on the seams, all night. Red Maul lit the work line with held fire. Fur, day, gree, and onyx cut until their claws steamed. The hunters ran canvas from trunk to trestle at a jog. Ahmad kept every burial word at a walk, refusing to rush the dead. The floor breathed under all of it, all night. At first, light mod cut notch 57. 57 of 60 stood in the wood. 3 days of warmth left on the staff. The last seam came free with the sun behind it. Onyx drew it whole out of a rose glass trunk. Maud walked the trestle rows one last time, hands in every basket, skull by skull, wing by wing. She checked the whole flight. A flight's worth, she said, clean, not one stray bone in it. Boyd's hunters raised their caps off the wagon beds. Counted theirs, I said, loud, down the work line. Copper and mire cut every seam of it. Verdigris rattled copper wings. Onyx went straight back to watching the yard. The yard answered before the cheer died. The floor's breathing stopped. Stone cracked like lake ice going out. The middle of the yard humped upward, slow and huge. Slabs the size of wagons slid off the hump. Out of the floor came a ridge of wet gray. It rose past the tallest glass trees and kept rising. A hillside that moved, then it held there, streaming dust, and I understood it. A shoulder, one joint of the thing below. The Hollow King had rolled over in its sleep, half-built. Around it, the files kept walking down into the cracks. Every basket on the trestles rattled. The warm shell went from drumming to hammering. Great Bones spread himself over the sled, wings wide. The brood came out of the work line into a ring. Boyd counted nothing. There was nothing left to count but one. Maud reached the sled the same breath I did. She looked at the shoulder, then the staff, then me. It's building faster than she's warming, she said. Feed now, or run. I looked at the shoulder standing over the glass trees. I looked at the clean bone racked in the baskets. The brood watched me, waiting on one word. We didn't come west to run, I said. I pulled the sled straps loose with my own hands. The warm shell hammered under my palms like a second heart. I took the first glass bone off the trestle, and I fed her. I fed her bone by bone straight off the canvas. Maud handed me each piece with the burial words still on it. The shell took everyone in a wash of white light. A wing bone long as an oar went in whole. Finger bones went in fanned, the way they had grown. The light closed over each one and left no mark. One bloodline a meal, Maud said, over the glow. This one we picked clean to the last knuckle. Behind me, the shoulders stood over the glass trees. It streamed dust and held still. I stopped looking at it after the third bone. My work was the shell. Its work could wait one more night. The brood made a ring around the sled, faces out. Great Bon held the yard side, wings half spread. Dirge stood at my back, still as the trees. The hunters ran canvas from the trestles at a jog. Boyd walked the ring with his glass and kept it moving. The gray files walked past us into the cracks, same as ever. Not one head turned. Whatever called them wanted them below, not up here. The cold egg rode next to her shell, dark as ever. 2 shells on one sled and one voice between them. We fed her through the day and into the dark. Red Maw lit the trestle line with held fire. The shell burned hotter with every wing that went in. By midnight I fed with my sleeves wrapped over my palms. The wrappings on the sled rail smoked and went brown. Maud cut the worst of them away with her knife. Snowdrift leaned in and breathed frost over my hands, cold enough to keep me at the work. The keeper carried this thing wrapped in one cloth, Maud said. It barely warmed his hands then. Look at her now. Once in the night the shoulder moved. One grinding shift, stone sliding off wet gray. Every hunter went flat between the baskets. The whole ring of dragons swung to face it. Then it went still and the dust ran out. We worked on. Nobody slowed again after that. At first, light Maud cut notch 58. 58 of 60 stood on the staff. 2 days of warmth left and half a flight still on the trestles. Faster, I said, and took the next bone. At noon, Boyd came down off the bone pile. Ingrid's lamps are lit, he said. Dark since the passes, burning now. Ingrid knows something is close. I fed the shell another wing joint and let the rim watch. At dusk, Dirge kept the warding hour all the same. The gold champion stood into the bone fire first, unasked. Forent, the fen drake, stood it next to him. The fleck under his scale stayed a fleck. I checked it with my thumb between 2 bones. One more dusk was all I asked of that fire. We fed her through the second night without stopping. The hunters passed bone hand to hand down the line. Maud met every skull at the sled herself. Her voice wore down to gravel and she kept the words anyway. Near the bottom of the last basket she stopped. She lifted out the small skull with both hands. The one that had sat whole in the amber crown. She carried it the last 10 steps like a lamp. Last of the flight, she said. Go home. I set the little skull against the shell. The light took it slower than any bone before it. Slow, the way you hold the one you kept for last. The glow closed over it, and the shell went dark. 1 breath. 2. The whole work line stood still. Boyd's hand found the sled rail. Even the floor's slow breathing seemed to wait. Then the shell lit from the inside, orange bright. Tie ball, lineage accepted. Glass, clutch, 12.away 12. Her count, the dead flights coming home, 12 of 12. The last of her clutch was home. Maud sat down hard on the sled's edge. The staff lay across her knees. 12, she said. 100 years scattered. 12 of 12, home. Boyd pulled off his cap and held it to his chest. A seam of light opened down the shell's side. Glass light fell out of it like slow rain. She came through the light, wet and small, house cat sized, thin as a lantern frame. Her wings opened and they were clearer than the trees. The bloom's colors hit those wings and broke apart. Cobalt and amber and rose scattered down the work line. Color ran over the baskets and the hunters' faces. A passing file caught her colors across its flanks. Not one of the gray broke stride. 2 little wings through 100 colors. Another she, Maud said, half laughing. She shook the wet off, and the colors jumped with her. Behind her, the seam of light sealed itself shut. The shell sat whole again, hotter than ever. I put out my arm, and she walked up it. Her claws were pinpricks through the sleeve. She settled on my shoulder and broke the morning apart. Glass wing, I said, loud so the whole line heard it, hatched in her own flight's yard. The hunters raised a shout with 2 sleepless nights in it. Tidesong, the sea singer, put her head up and sang one note. Glass wing answered it, thin and high. Her first sound, the whole ring of dragons rumbled low all around us. Maud pushed herself up and cut notch 59. 59 of 60 stood on the staff. 1 day of warmth left. Hut was still pale when the shell flared again. New light, new words. The words the whole road had been driving at. IX. Clutch complete. She comes at dawn. Nix. Boyd read it out twice. She comes at dawn, he said. Tomorrow's dawn. Notch 60. Maud stood very still and looked at the staff in her fist. Then she laughed once, low, at herself. 60 days of warmth, she said. We read it as a cooling. It was a term. A mare carries 11 months. This one carries 60 days. She was never dying in there. She was always going to take all 60. The clock was never a fuse. It was a cradle. Every notch on that staff was hers. The valley answered her. The yard floor boomed like a drum hit once. Cracks ran out through the glass trees. Slabs the size of barn doors went over. Next to the first shoulder, a second shoulder came up. Then a ridge between them, long as a street, wet gray backbone shedding stone as it rose. It climbed past both shoulders and stopped there, swaying, not standing, not yet, building and building faster than it had all week. Boyd lowered his glass. It's coming up early, he said. Maud looked at the shell, then at the yard. She comes at dawn, she said. It means to be up first. I looked at the ridge over the trees, then at the shell, hot at my back. Everything left in the world was 1 night wide. Ring tight on the sled, I said. Trestles up for a barricade. Fire at every gap. The hunters dragged the empty trestles into a line. Boyd set his hunters along it, bows strung. Red Moss set watchfires down its whole length. Great Bond put himself between the sled and the yard. Glasswing pressed flat against my neck. Her colors dimmed. 1 night, I said, down the whole line. She asks us for 1 night. We give it. Dusk came down through the glass trees. The bloom woke violet, trunk by trunk. The ridge stood black against the last of the light. Boyd swept the sky once, out of habit. Nothing flew west of the passes. Nothing had for days. Then the valley went quiet under our boots. All down the slopes, the gray files stopped walking. 100 lines of them, still as fence posts. The whole west held one breath. Then every gray head turned at once. Not to the yard, not to the thing building under it, to the sled, to the egg. I stepped in front of the sled and raised my arm. Every gray eye on the slopes tracked the move. Not one of them took a step down the hill. Lines for the night, I called down the yard. Nobody rests until she's up. The gray stood in their files and waited. Still as fence posts, every head aimed at the egg. Their breath steamed off the slopes in one slow rhythm. The thing under the yard was still climbing out of its own grave. Every hour it spent digging was an hour I got. I meant to spend every hour of it. Boyd walked the ground with me while the light died. A ring of old stones circled the butchering yard. Waist high in places, shoulder high where the slab still stood. Hardcover, clean lines, the sled at its heart. I slapped the tallest stone with my palm. The ring, I said. The brood holds this. Everything soft stands inside it. Boyd chalked the gaps before I finished talking. His hunters dragged the trestle barricade in behind the stones. They split their arrows into bundles along its length. Maud walked the sled to the ring's center herself. She stood the notched staff upright next to the shells. The whole camp turned around those 2 dark eggs. Horns came off the coast road before full dark. Boyd's glass went up fast. Riders, he said. Sea banners, long column. They came up the valley floor 2 by 2. Salt-stained mail, boar spears, tired horses moving smart. The sea chancellor rode the front in a storm cloak. Agnes swung down next to me and faced the ridge. It swayed black over the glass trees, still building. She washed it the way she'd washed her seawall. 40 days by my own charts, she said. To the day. Where do you want my riders? I pointed her at the open flank. Picket the horses upwind of the brood, I said. She was shouting orders before I dropped my hand. Her riders strung a horse line and dug in by torchlight. Her captain rolled fire casks up to the barricade. Not one of them asked what the ridge was. Sailors know a storm when they see one. Torchlight showed on the pass road an hour later. A long column, marching slow, wagons in its middle. Boyd read it through the glass. Flat-voiced. Chain wagons, he said. They left her vaults the night of the wager. I watched them roll. Stonecrown's regent rode the column's head in steel. Ingrid set her camp on the road behind us. Not with us. Not against the yard. Placed where she could watch both wars at once, her soldiers dug a ditch that faced both ways. The wagons parked, hub to hub behind it, tarps on. Ingrid sat her horse and watched our fires a long time. Then her tent went up, and she was gone inside it. Near the wagons, one rider sat a horse with bound hands. The keeper and his own family's irons kept like baggage. Duncoon didn't call out across the dark. He found the sled with his eyes and nodded once. I nodded back over the whole field between us. The herald raised a plain tent between the two camps. The compact went up on a board at its mouth. The keeper's book sat next to it under lamp and guard. The valley's voice keeping both papers where both crowns could see. Two enemies, one field and the paper in the middle. I called the posts with the brood grounded around the sled. Great Bond, the gate gap, the widest break got the widest back. Squall wall, the tall slab, weather eyes on the slopes, red maw, the fires, double every one of them. Verde gris onyx, the cracked ground where the files walk. Basalt, the slide. Stack it higher. Snowdrift, the north stones. Ice every approach. Dawnfang, high watch over everything. Dirge the ward, bonefire at full dark. Tide Song, the sea singer, took the flank next to the riders. Glasswing stayed at the sled, hours old, colors banked. Maud raised an eyebrow at the small bright shape. And the little one, she said. She stays with the eggs, I said. That's a post too. That left one flight with no post named. I pointed Torrent, the fendrake, to the rear line. The fleck still sat under his one scale, held, not gone. A flecked dragon had no place in a night wall. He looked at me, then at the sled. He walked straight past my order and planted over both eggs. 4 legs braced, his body a roof over the shells. The gold champion stood into the egg watch next to him. A guest, the sick one and the nameless one, shoulder to shoulder. Nobody had asked either of them. Neither one meant to move before dawn. I let the order die on the ground. Some posts picked their own soldiers. At full dark, Dirge walked the warding fire all the same. The champion stepped into the bonfire first, unasked. Poor Ent stood it after him, and the fleck stayed a fleck. Boyd watched the flames comb over the flecked scale. Fire holds it! Fire can't finish it, he said. The purge fails where the call reaches, and we're camped on the collar. Maud answered from the sled rail without looking up. Then we hold until something bigger than fire wakes. Then I gave the brood the ring. I climbed the gate stone and raised my fist. The yard went quiet, down to the fire crackle. I dropped the fist. The flights went up together. One wing beat, one shape. They turned once over the yard in a slow wheel. Firelight ran under their wings in a moving band. Then they came down on the ring in order. Each flight to its named stone, light as settling birds. Not one scraped cloth. Not one call between them. Across the road, Stonecrown soldiers stopped unloading chain. They stood with the coils hanging dead in their hands. One dropped his and didn't bend to pick it up. An officer barked them back to work, twice. They kept working with their faces turned our way. None of them had ever seen a flight hold a line. Their kingdom kept its dragons pressed in a book. The Sea Chancellor let out a long breath next to me. That's not a herd, Agnes said. That's an army with wings. I counted the posts out loud so the whole field heard. 12 flights stand this ground. One of them flecked. That's the wall between her and the dark. The bloom woke violet, trunk by trunk, down the slopes. The ridge swayed over the trees and kept on building. Stones slid off its back in small dry falls. The files on the slopes never sat and never fed. They stood their own watch, pointed at the sled. Boyd swept the sky once more from the bone pile. Empty, he said. Nothing up there that isn't gray. Maud ran her thumb down the staff's cut edge. Every day of the road stood on it in notches. It wants one more, she said. It gets its last cut at first light. Heat rolled off the warm shell in slow waves. The cold egg rode next to it, dark, quiet, still ours. Poor Ent breathed long and slow over both of them. The champion's gold held the firelight steady over the sled. Glasswing climbed my arm and pressed to my neck. Her colors sat banked down to small embers. Down the barricade the hunters' aides standing, bows strung. Nobody talked much. Everything worth saying had a post or a notch already. Maud looked down the ring of fires and wings. The world forgot what this looked like, she said. Tomorrow it remembers. I walked the ring one full turn post by post, a hand flat on Great Bond's leg at the gate gap. A word up its squall on his slab. Frost crunched under my boots at snowdrift stones. At the flank, the riders stood up from their fires to nod. At the rear, Ingrid's lamps burned in their own cold row. Every eye that met mine got the same nod back. Then I came back to the gate stone and climbed it. The field turned its faces up to me. Hunters, riders, 12 flights, 2 watchers at the sled. Tor Ent's slow breathing was the loudest thing in the ring. Behind them all, the ridge stood black on the last light. She comes at dawn, I said. So that's the whole war now. Hold the dawn. The gray came down the slopes at full dark. I climbed the gate stone and filled my chest. First watch, I called. Every flight to its stone, wings snapped open around the ring in answer. 12 shapes rose against the fires and settled, each to its post. First watch of the last night, and the moon not yet over the ridge. The gray didn't charge. They walked, even files, even steps, hundreds of feet on one beat. No calls, no hunger sounds, nothing. Boyd's voice came flat off the barricade. They're not hunting, he said. They're being spent. At the ring, the gay gap took the weight first. Gray drakes hit Great Bone chest to chest, 3 at a time. He didn't trade ground. He was the ground. Each rush broke on his shoulders and went back down the slope. The fallen rolled into the files behind, and the files walked over their own. Red Maw worked the lanes next to him. Ember fire raked the slope in low, flat stripes. The gray that hurried burned. The gray that kept their pace reached Great Bone instead. 2 files stalled between fire and stone, then came apart. Gate holds, I called down the line. Watch your stones. On the north stones, snowdrift had iced every approach to glass. The gray hit the glaze and their claws went out from under them. They slid back down their own path in heaps. Basalt stood over the slide with a boulder in each fist. He fed the rockfall 1 stone at a time, patient as a mason. The heaps under him stopped moving. On the tall slab, Squawwall let his weather go. Wind came off the slab like a door slamming open. Flyers flipped in the air and dropped into their own files. What the wind missed, the light found. 1 white bolt, then 2. Thunder rolled through the yard and out over the glass trees. On the east curve, Ver de Gris and On Ikes held the cracked ground. On Ikes had spent the dusk turning it to swamp. Black mire, hip-deep, dressed over with dust. The files walked in and kept trying to walk. Ver de Gris went through the stuck ones, copper and exact, no wasted cut. Then Dawnfang, the Dawn Wyvern, fell out of the dark. A wedge of flyers had lined up on Squall's back. Dawnfang broke it in one pass, wheeled, and went back up. High watch. Nothing flew over my ring twice. On the human flank, Boyd's voice kept the barricade in rhythm. Loose, notch, hold, loose. His hunters shot in turns, 1 bundle at a time. The Sea Chancellor's riders stood the ditch with boar spears grounded. Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, walked their line with a torch, naming men as she passed. A gray pack tried the flank at a dead run. The fire casks met them rolling and burst in the middle of them. 1 hunter went down with a claw in his coat. Boyd called it before the man could scream. Then Tidesong came over the ditch. The sea singer was fishing boat size now, and she used all of it. She pinned the drake flat and shook the hunter loose, gentle as a netted fish. Her tail swept the burning flat the way a wave clears a deck. What still stood after her, the boar spears finished? Agnes planted her torch and looked up at the sea singer. I've held walls all my life, she said. I like this one better. Over the eggs, Tor Ent's breathing stayed long and slow. The fendrake roofed both shells and never once turned toward the fighting. Next to him, the champion's gold caught every fire in the yard and held it steady. Heat rolled off the warm shell in waves that matched the fight. She could hear her war being fought. And over them both, Glasswing went to war her own way. Hound-size now, hours from the shell, and burning bright. She hung over the egg line and opened her wings wide. The bloom's violet light hit the glass of her and came out as knives. Color sprayed across the slopes in moving sheets. The gray's night eyes wanted dark, and she took the dark away. Files flinched. Leapers missed their marks by a full body. A drake that had lined up on the sled landed blind in On Ix's mire instead. Maud watched from the notched staff under all that thrown light. Hours old, she said, and she just put out their eyes. At the ring, Dirge walked the inside line with the bone fire trailing him. Pale flame, knee-high, running stone to stone in a closed loop. A gray drake came over the north stones and met it. It did not get up. Boyd spat over the barricade rail. That fire cures nothing this close to the collar, he said. It still burns fine. Then the wave learned. The files quit the gate all at once and poured east. Everybody on the slopes turned toward the mire in one motion, hunting the soft point. I didn't raise my voice. Red Maw striped the east slope. On Ike's AS deep in your ground. Dawnfang, their backs. Red Maw's fire walked over ahead of the rush and cut it into thirds. On Ike's sank the middle third to the shoulders. Dawnfang came down through the rest like a thrown spear. The soft point wasn't soft. The wave paid in bodies to find that out. It didn't get the bodies back. I stayed on the gate stone and kept my voice level. Calm was my whole post. The brood fought the way I called it, so I called it slow. Red Maw, rest your fire. Bah, salt, feed the slide. Swallwind, only save the sky. Each order got 1 beat of quiet, then got done. Nobody lunged. Nobody chased a kill past their own stone. The wave crested against the whole ring at once, one long, grinding push. The ring did not move. Then the push just ended. The gray, still standing, turned and walked back up the slopes. They weren't running. They were called back. They stood into their ranks and left their dead where they lay. "Call your stones," I shouted. The answers came back around the ring, post by post. Gate held, slab held, slide held, ice held, mire held, flank held. Over the eggs, Torrent breathed. The gold shone. Glasswing folded her light. Burns and cuts down the line, and nothing worse than either. 12 flights had stood this ground at dusk. One of them flecked. 12 stood it now, and the ring kept every stone. Boyd lowered his glass and set it for the whole field. First wave, broken clean. The barricade found its voice. Hunters and riders roaring at the slopes. Maud didn't cheer. She ran her thumb across the staff's cut edge. "It still wants one more," she said. "It gets its cut at first light. Hold for it." Across the road, Ingrid's camp had watched all of it. Stonecrown soldiers stood along their ditch in one silent row. Chain wagons sat behind them, hub to hub, tarps on. Not one of her archers had loosed to help either side. One tarp corner hung loose now, and lamplight moved under it. Ingrid stood at her tent's mouth with her arms folded. I couldn't read Ingrid's face at that distance. The lamps moving around the wagons read fine. Boyd came off the barricade, wiping his hands. "They didn't spend a wing they'll miss," he said. "That wave was a question." "Then we answered it," said Agnes, the Sea Chancellor. Boyd shook his head at the slopes. "It asked what we cost," he said. "Now it knows." The ground shivered under the yard. Once, long, every dragon on the ring turned its head at the same time. The violet light guttered down the slopes, trunk by trunk. Out on the ridge, the black mass quit its swaying. The stonefall stopped. The digging sound that had run under everything since dusk stopped too. Boyd's glass came up and didn't move again. Torrent's breathing was the only sound left in the ring. Then the ridge stood up. It came off the far slope in one slow move. Shoulders first, wide as the pass we'd ridden through. Then the neck, hung with 100 years of the dead. Then the head, higher than the watchfire's light could reach. Wings opened off its back in rows and put out the stars. The Hollow King stood all the way up for the first time. The hillside had a shape now, and the shape was looking at the sled. I called the second watch off the gatestone. "Rotate, rested wings forward. Red Maw, bank your fire." Flights traded posts around the ring, pair by pair. Verdigris took the east curb, so Onyx could resink his ground. Sol climbed the slide with fresh stones in both fists. The gray came back down the slopes on the same dead beat. On the ridge, the Hollow King watched the sled and spent its files. Second watch of the last night, and the moon just clear of the ridge. Boyd's voice came off the flank, hard. "Reeve, wrong way, the wagons!" His glass pointed over the road, not up the slopes. Across the road, the tarps came off the chain wagons in one pull. Lamplight ran down the links, wagon after wagon. Old metal, forged heavy, every link thick as a man's wrist. The hooks at the ends fit a dragon's leg, or a wing joint. Stonecrown's companies fell in on the wagons, not on their ditch. Crews hammered anchor stakes through the wheel rings. Wintropes paid out into the dark. 6-man teams lifted the hooks like rams. Not one rank faced the gray. Every rank faced my ring. An officer walked the wagon line with a raised lamp. His order carried flat and clear over the road. "Chain the young ones. Where her children are held, the mother stays." On the human flank, Maud heard it the way I did. "Hostages," she said. "Not the egg, her children." Her thumbs stayed on the staff's newest cut. Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, spat into the ditch. "Mid-war," she said. She waited for mid-war. Across the road, the first wagon arm snapped forward. The hook flew flat and low across the dark. It took Snodrift at the foreleg on the north stones. The links whipped tight and bit down through his frost. Ice ran down the chain, and the chain didn't care. He pulled, and 3 staked wagons dragged a hand width. Then they held. Draft horse-sized, and the old metal held him like a foal. His bellow cracked across the whole yard. The ring answered before I could. Red Maw came around with fire climbing his throat. Great Bond's head swung off the gate, slow and heavy. I filled my chest and cut it flat. "Hold! No fire over that road!" Red Maw's flame died back to a glow in his jaws. "Not one burned man in her colors," I called. "One dead soldier is all Stonecrown's regent needs." Then the chain stopped being her crime and started being a war. At the ring. The files hit the gate through all of it. Great Bond met the rush chest on and gave no step. Squall's wind slapped a wedge of flyers into the slope. Onyx's fresh mire swallowed a file to the shoulders. Dirge walked his pale fire, stone to stone, steady. Chains or no chains, the gray kept their beat. But the north stones had lost their ice layer's reach. Snodrift fought the chain, and his glaze thinned. Files felt the gap and leaned into it. Basalt fed the slide double time, stone after stone. He was holding 2 posts with 1 pair of hands. A leaper came over the thinned glaze at a run. Great Bond's tail swept it out of the air. It landed in the mire and stayed there. On the human flank. The second hook came in low. Tidesong saw it and rolled out from under it. The hook plowed a trench through the ditch mud. The sea singer came up with her teeth at the road. Boyd's voice split his line into halves. Half turns, arrows on the slope, eyes on the wagons. Then, lower, just for me, third hooks winding, they're aiming at the little one's light. Over the eggs. Torrent's breathing stayed long and slow. The fendrake kept his roof over both shells and never turned. The champion's gold burned steady next to him. The warm shell beat faster against the night air. Over them, Glasswing threw her light and held her post. Hound-sized, hours old, and the third hook was hers. Fire would win the wagons and lose everything after. I called a name instead of an order. Keeper, I shouted across the road. Tell them what they're pulling. Across the road. The keeper stood up in the middle of her own army. Dun-Kun raised his ironed wrists over his head. Chain rang on chain, and helmets turned. His guards looked at the officer looked at the wagons. No hand landed on him. He walked to the nearest wagon, dragging his own links. He laid his wrists next to the great chain. Same links, man-sized and dragon-sized. Same old crown stamp under the lamp twice over. Men leaned in to look at it. His voice came out level, and it carried. These are the irons your great-grandfathers forged for the butchering. Not a pike moved on that side of the road. A hook team's front man looked down at his hands. The officer's lamp stopped swinging. The keeper turned the great chain so the stamp caught the light. My family keeps the yard where the frost flight lies. Your own fathers carried those bones up the passes. These links held that flag down while the king's men worked. He let the chain fall in the mud. Pull tonight, and you are the great-grandfathers now. The nearest team set its hook down in the mud. A white-bearded sergeant walked to the wagon with his lamp. He held the flame to the stamp and read it. He stood there for one long breath. Then he grounded his pike on the stone. One iron ring, loud in the cold. The sound carried down the whole wagon line. The company behind him grounded theirs in a long rattle. From the gate stone, I held our fire and watched. The next company took it up without one spoken word. Then the next, down the wagon line. Hooks went down into the mud, one team after another. The officer walked his own line and found no takers. The winch crews stepped off the ropes. The third hook never left its wagon. Snowdrift's chain went slack into the mud. A young soldier walked out to the North Stones alone. He carried a maul and no shield. He knocked the hook loose with two swings. Snowdrift shook the links off and lowered his head. The soldier stood in the frost dragon's shadow, unhurt. He walked back to his own line, whole. Both armies watched every step of it. Nobody loosed. The keeper's guards came for him then. Dun-Kun held out his wrists and walked back on his own. I kept my arm up, holding the ring's fire quiet. The officer screamed the order a second time. The chains stayed where they lay. Pikes stood grounded from the ditch to the wagons. Then Ingrid came out of her tent into the lamplight. She gave the order herself, word for word. Her captains looked at the stamp instead of at her. She gave it again, and her voice thinned in the middle. Not one pike came up off the stone. Her army stood in front of her and would not look at her. Ingrid looked across the road then, past all of them, at me. I watched her look, and I gave her nothing back. The tent flap dropped. Her lamp went dark behind it, on the human flank. Boyd came along the barricade, glass still out. Count it, he said. Her line quit the war mid-war. Not a scale of hours scratched, not a drop spilled. Maud looked across the road at the keeper. No fire did that, she said. One true sentence, from a man in chains. The Valley Herald wrote fast under his lantern. Say it again, he called over the road. Slower, it goes in the record. Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, looked a long time at the grounded pikes. Honest soldiers, she said. Wrong crown. At the ring. I turned back to my own war. Rotate. Basalt. Feed the slide. Squall. Wind only. The files came on and broke on the stones. Snowdrift went back to his ice with chain marks on one leg. His new glaze ran wider than the old one. The ring had held every post through the whole betrayal. Not one stone had traded its watch for the road. Then the ground rolled under the yard, long and slow. The slack chains shivered where they lay in the mud. Every dragon on the ring turned its head west together. Glasswing pulled her throne light and small over the eggs. Torrent's breathing was the loudest thing on the field. On the ridge, the Hollow King took its first step down, came down the slope through its own files. It walked over its own gray and didn't slow. The files split around its feet and closed behind it. Glass trees went down under it like wheat. Its steps rolled the mud in the ditch. Its head never turned toward the road. Not toward the wagons, or the grounded pikes, or the tents. Not toward one human thing on that whole field. Two armies stood in its reach, and it wanted neither. It walked for the eggs. I put Great Bone on the gate before the Hollow King reached it. Small hours of the last night, and the moon riding high. Anchor, I called. Chest to the stone. He set himself, and the weight came down. The claw hit the west arc of the ring. Stones the size of carts jumped in their beds. The whole line bowed inward like a fence in flood. Dust stood off the yard in one pale sheet. Great Bone took the gate stone on his shoulder and held. His hind claws cut grooves in the yard rock. He gave a hand width. Then he gave nothing more. A hillside leaned on my wall, and one dragon leaned back. He held a causeway once while a whole city watched. He held my gate now. Boyd's shout came off the flank. "It's winding up again!" I ran the gate line, low, under the dust. "Brace on Great Bone!" "Nobody trades a post." The second hit landed before the dust came down. A third landed further along the arc. Ring stones ground on each other and split open. New gaps, thin as doorways, all down the west bow. At the ring, the files found the gaps at once. The gray stopped climbing the stones. They came through the gaps instead, 3 abreast where they fit. I called the bends as they opened. Seam left of the gate. Second seam. Red maw. Squall put wind down the widest gap. 3 flyers folded into the slope and stayed down. Red maw burned a wedge back out of the second. Dirge walked his pale fire along the whole bowed line. Ah! Very day. Gree rolled a file flat against the east curve. Onyx held his mire under the third gap. The line held, but it held bent. Bent lines break. I knew it, and their beat said the gray knew it too. On the human flank, Boyd walked his barricade, calling ranges. Arrows went up the slope in flat sheets. Maud kept the staff in her fist like a spear. Over the eggs. Torrent's breathing stayed long and slow. Both shells rode the sled under him, the dark one and the warm one. The cold shell never moved. The warm one beat quick under Torrent's chest. Then the bow spat a file straight at the sled. The fendrake rose over both shells and stayed there. His feet never left the sled's shadow. He fought with neck and tail alone. He caught a lever out of the air and broke it. He threw the body back through the gap it came from. 2 more came in under his reach. The gold champion met them next to the sled. One swing of gold and both were gone into the dark. Torrent roared over the shells, furious, and gave no step. The fleck under his scale showed gray when the firelight passed. Flecked, warded, and still he kept his roof over her. The champion set his shoulder against the fendrake's side, the doomed one and the sick one, standing one watch. Over them, Glasswing kept her light pulled in close, hound-sized, hours-old, still at her post. The egg watch held. At the ring, the Hollow King changed its angle. Its claw came in flat across the top of the gate. Great Bond caught it and slid back half a length. The claw tip clipped the gate's capstone loose. Capstone spun low across the yard. It skipped once off the rock. The champion threw his body over the sled. The stone hit the sled's rail and burst it. The rail's broken end whipped over the warm shell. The shell cracked, and the light through the crack wasn't gray. It was the color of sunrise. The crack ran a hand's length down the black shell. A thin line of dawn stood in it hours early. It lit the underside of Torrent's jaw. It lit the champion's gold like a coal blown bright. I was afraid all the way down, one whole breath of it. 60 days of warmth, and I had just heard it break. On the human flank, Maud had her staff up, pointing. "Not gray light," she called across the yard. "Dawn color." She comes at dawn, and the dawn's already in the shell. Boyd's glass swung from the sky to the sled. Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, gripped the barricade with both hands, and the field answered the light. Every gray thing on it went still at once. The file stopped mid-stride in the gaps. The Hollow King stopped pushing. Its head came down level with the gate. It looked at that thin dawn-colored line, and it did not attack. Torrent put his body between the light and that gaze. The champion's gold threw the crack light back at it. The quiet held for 3 heartbeats. Then the whole mass leaned in again, harder than before. Boyd's voice read it for the flank. "It's not afraid of the light. It's been walking toward that for 100 years. The files leaned into the gaps harder than they had all night. The light hadn't hurt it. The light had told it the time. At the ring, the bow stayed bent and it was bleeding ground. Every gap had gray in it. Great Bond had a torn shoulder and an unbroken gate. This was the breath where lines break, or don't. I climbed the gate stone next to Great Bond's neck. 12 posts, 1 breath, all of it out loud. "Great Bone, the gate is yours, whatever comes. Dirge, walk your fire down the bow end to end. Squall, wind in the west seam, keep it blind. Red Maw, burn the second seam shut. Bird of Degree, the east curve, roll it back. Onyx, drown the third seam to mud. Basalt, stones to the bow, fill them as they crack. Snowdrift, fresh glaze, north stones to the gate. Dawnfang, the dawn wyvern, high watch, call every leaper down to me. Tide Song, the sea singer, the ditch, nothing walks it. Torrent, the fendrake, the shells, only the shells. Glasswing, light, just light." The ring turned around my voice like one animal. Squall's wind met Redmaw's fire in the west seam. The wedge inside it came apart between them. Verde Gris hit the east curve and rolled it back a body length. Onyx's mire rose in the third seam and swallowed it. Basalt ran stone after stone into the bow. He set them faster than the gray could pull them. Snowdrift's ice ran wide over the chain-marked stones. His new glaze reached the gate for the first time. Dawnfang, the dawn wyvern, dropped through the high dark, calling, and leapers fell short. Tide Song closed the ditch with teeth and tail. Dirge's pale fire stitched the whole line back together. The bow straightened, stone by stone, gap by gap. The gaps shut. The gray hit a whole ring again and broke on it. The files washed back down the slope like tied-off rock. I kept the wheel turning after that. Rested pairs forward, spent pairs back to breathe. Snowdrift favored the chain-marked leg and glazed anyway. Red Maw banked his fire between calls and never left his post. The calls came easy, and the ring answered easy. The gray spent themselves on a line that would not stay still, on the human flank. Boyd's voice came down the barricade, flat and clear. 12 orders, 12 answers, every post held. The Valley Herald wrote fast under his lantern. "In order," the herald called. "I have every order, in order." Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, shook her head slow. "One voice," she said. 12 flights on one voice, mid-war. Across the road, Stonecrown's grounded company stood along their wagons and watched. "Pikes down, heads up." Most of them had never seen a flight that wasn't gray. Now they had watched one work. On the human flank, Maud's thumb found the newest notch on the staff. "One notch left to cut," she said. I cut it at first light. "Hold that long." Over the eggs. The crack had not grown. Torrent's breathing ran long and slow over the shells. The champion's gold stood steady next to him. The thin dawn light ticked in the crack with the shell's own beat. Glasswing fed her glow down around it, small and close. A broken shell, and the light inside it kept time. Hours of dark left to stand between her and that thing. At the ring, the Hollow King drew back from the gate. I braced for the next hit. It never came. It stood in the middle of its own files, head low. It looked past Great Bone, at the thin line of dawn on the sled. Then, it reached down with one claw, almost gentle. It gripped a ringstone at the far end of the bow. It pulled. The stone came out of my ring like a tooth. It set the stone down behind it out of any dragon's reach. Then, it reached for the next one. The second stone came out slower. It set that one down next to the first, neat as a mason. Maud saw it too. Her voice came quiet off the flank. "Stonework," she said. "It means to be standing here at dawn." Grapevine couldn't answer it without leaving the gate. Boyd's voice came off the flank. "It found the one move you've no dragon to spare for. No rush in it now. No files spent in the gaps. It had stopped paying for this war in bodies." I looked at the ridgeline, black, edge to edge, no pale rim yet. Hours to dawn. The Hollow King had learned to wait, and stone by stone it was taking my ring apart. At the ring, another stone came out, and the flank went with it. 3 ring lengths of wall slumped into one open door. I ran the arc toward it, calling posts as I ran. "Basalt, stone to the breach, dirge, fire on my left." Guy, the gray came off the slope in one black sheet. They did not test the new gap, they poured through it. This was the bill for every stone it had pulled. On the human flank, the falling wall took the barricade's end with it. 2 of Boyd's hunters went down with the timber. They came up in the open, square in the Gray's road. "Hold the rail," Boyd shouted. "Don't run the slope." No dragon of mine could reach them in time. I could. I went and got him. We made the gate's shadow as the files hit the breach. Boyd's arrows sheeted over our heads the whole way. At the ring. Salt drove a slab into the open door. The slab bought one breath, no more. The files boiled over it and kept coming. Red Mob burned the first rank down in the gap. The second rank walked in over the first. Squall flattened one wedge, and 2 grew back. Dirge walked his fire down the whole bent bow. Snodrift favored the chain-marked leg and glazed the rail anyway. Every dragon I had was holding something already. The line was not breaking. It was spending itself to stay a line. And I stood too far forward, and I knew it. The hunters were behind the gate stone. I was not. I was in the open with nothing but a voice. Grapevine held the gate and could not leave it. I called for Onyx. The mire came, and it came slow. Boyd yelled something the wind took away. The gray folded in around me like a closing hand. Then the firelight went out over me. Not smoke, a shadow with a claw in it. The Hollow King had come down the bow without one sound. Its claw stood open over me, wide as a barn floor. So, that was the trade it had built all night. Stones out, wall down, and the warden in the open. I had no post left to call. I had nowhere to be but under it. Gold came over me instead. The champion left the sled in one flat leap. He had stood that watch all night and left it once. He left it for me. He put his whole body over mine and shut his wings. The claw came down with a hillside's weight behind it. The sound went through the yard rock and up my legs. His legs buckled next to my head. He held, tore, and roared off the sled behind us, one long tearing note. The claw rose and came down again. He held again. Over the wings I heard the claw grind on his back plates. The third hit drove him flat over me. The stone under us cracked with the weight. Then the claw drew back, and the weight was gone. Dirge's pale fire dropped in front of us like a curtain. Boyd's arrows and Squall's wind filled the gap over it. I crawled out from under the champion's wing. He lay where he had held. The blows had driven his gold in along the spine. One wing lay open on the stone the wrong way. His eye found me and stayed on me, calm. Gold to the rim and calm. They stole him before I could ever speak a name over him. He chose me anyway, at the tally, in front of every house. He had just chosen me again with all his body. His breath went long, then longer, then it did not come back. The yard fire light moved on his gold-like breath. It was only the light. The rage went up my line before I found one word. Every throat I had hatched sounded at once, one note. The files checked in the seams at that sound. The Hollow King drew its claw back into the dark. It had spent its one clean hit on gold instead of me. Over the eggs, Verdigris and Onyx drew him back to the sled. It took the two of them to move him. Tor Ent, the Fendrake, made room and never left the shell's shadow. I laid the champion's head down next to the two eggs. The cold shell sat dark by his brow. It had not said one word since the tally. It did not say one now. The cracked shell ticked its thin dawn light across his gold. I straightened his neck the way Maud kept the rights. I folded his near wing back against his side. I put my palm flat on his brow for one breath. Maud walked over and bowed her head over him. She cut nothing. She said nothing. Boyd's glass came down off the sky. Glasswing pulled her light in low across the gold. Hound-sized, hours old, she stood her small watch over him. I never got to name him, I said. Nobody answered that. There was no answer to it. I stood up and turned back to the ring. Dawn was not waiting, and the breach was still open. At the ring, the 9 I hatched answered before I called one post. Dirge went first, my first. As pale fire cut the breach end to end, Squall dropped the sky into the seam behind it. Red Maw burned the slope black in front of the gate. Verdigris rolled the east files back on themselves. Onyx drowned the breach's mouth to mud. Basalt walled the mud while it still moved. Grapebone took the gate arc forward one whole step. Dawnfang, the Dawn Wyvern, drove the leapers down into the fires. Tor Ent, the Fendrake, led from the sled, roaring, and never left the shells. 9 throats, one note, and a gold-sized hole in it. There was no wildness in it anywhere. That was the worst of it for the gray. Every burn landed on a call I had not made yet. 9 dragons fought like one flight with one heart. I gave them the wheel anyway, and they were already turning it. Rested pairs forward, spent pairs back to breathe. Twice the files tried the east curve instead. Verdigris was there first both times. The young 3 worked under the 9, quiet. Snowdrift glazed every stone basalt set. Tidesong, the sea singer, held the ditch below it all. Glasswing kept her light on the sled and nowhere else. The files broke on the bow and washed back down the slope. This time they kept washing, past the tree-lined shadow. The breach closed stone by stone under Basalt's feet. The ring stood whole again, and it stood quiet. The 9 came back to their posts still in one rhythm. The gold was gone, and they moved like the watch had passed to them. On the human flank, Boyd read the slope through his glass. Clear to the tree line, he called. Nothing on that slope is coming back up. Maud set her thumb under the staff's last empty notch space. 1 hour to first light, she said. The 9 of them bought you that last hour hole. The Bally Herald wrote by his lantern, slow for once. He reached the champion's line and stopped. The gold champion, he said. He had no other name to put down. Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, watched the sled and said nothing. Across the road, Stonecrown's company stood bareheaded along their wagons. They had watched the gold die for one man. Their helmets stayed off. Nobody ordered that. Over the eggs, the crack's light kept its small, steady time. Toron's breathing ran long and slow over both shells. The champion's gold lay still next to the cold egg. The doomed one had finished his watch. The sick one stood it alone now. At the ring, the Hollow King had stopped its stonework. It stood far down the slope, in the middle of its files. It sent nothing up the hill. It drew its files in instead. Every gray thing left on the field turned and walked to it. Boyd's voice came off the flank, low. The wind's empty, he said. Every wing at his left is folding into the mass. The shape down there grew taller as we watched. Whatever it had left, it was making one wave of it. Out east, the ridge still held black, edge to edge, one last hour of dark. And in that hour, the Hollow King gathered everything it had left. At the ring, the gray wave came up the slope while the dark held. I climbed the gate stone and called the whole yard. All 12, I shouted. One wheel, every post at once. The 9 had fought as one flight before. Never the 12. The young 3 had never stood a full wheel. They folded in like the wheel had kept their places, all 12 of her clutch, together for the first time. The Hollow King walked in the middle of its files. It was not sending this wave up the hill, it was inside it. Nothing stood behind it on the slope. The whole night came down to one last hour. I counted the wheel the way Maud counted rights. Dirge. My first went first, and his pale fire cut the slope. Squall. The sky dropped on the burning rank and flattened it. Red Maw. The bow's whole left went up in one ember line. Verdigris. To roll the east files back into their own claws. Great Bon. The gate arc held, then took one step forward. Onyx. The mire drowned the old breach scar to black mud. Basalt! Stone walled the mud while it still moved. Dawnfang! The Dawn Wyvern drove the leapers down into the fires. Tor Ent, the Fendrake fought from the sled and never left it. Tidesong. The sea singer pulled the ditch up into a standing wall. Snowdrift, frost glazed every stone basalt set. Glasswing. Her light burst over the egg line and blinded the night eyes. 12 names, 12 answers. The count had become the fight itself. Every name pulled a spent post back to breathe. Every name put a fresh post into the seam. The gray hit a line that turned under them like a mill wheel. They had spent the whole night learning 9 dragons. The 12 was a new animal, and it ate them. I called the wheel again, and again it turned. The young 3 worked the gaps between the 9. Tide Song's wall drank the fire red. Ma could not spend twice. Snowdrift's glaze caught the climbers. Basalt stone had slowed. Glasswing's light found each rush before it ever formed. The 9 did the killing. The 3 made the killing cheap. Somewhere in that turning, they stopped being 9 and 3. There was only the wheel, and the wheel held. On the human flank, Maud watched the wheel from the staff. All 12, she said, her whole clutch on one wheel. No living eye ever saw that. The human line held the edges the wheel could not reach. Boyd's hunters kept the barricade rail and sheeted arrows down the slope. The Sea Chancellor's riders packed the road ditch with sea pikes and held it. The Valley Herald stood by his lantern and kept writing. Boyd read the dark over the waves back through his glass. The wind behind it is empty, he called. Every wing it has left is on this slope. At the ring, the Hollow King reached the bow and put both claws in. No patience left, no craft. It tore at the ring the way a starving man tears bread. Greatbond set his shoulder into the arc under it and held. Salt fed new stone into the gaps as fast as they opened. Squall and Redmaw burned the files off its flanks. The wheel kept turning around the giant like water around a post. It gained anyway, stone by stone. It did not need to beat the wheel. It needed to beat the hour, and the hour was thin. The wheel was paying for every turn now. Verdigris came back from the east curve, favoring one wing. Redmaw's fire ran shorter with every pass. Squall's thunder had gone hoarse hours ago. Dirge walked his line the same as the first hour. My first and the steadiest thing on the field. None of them broke rhythm. Spent was not the same as done. Not tonight. Over the eggs, the crack's light had stopped keeping small time. It ran brighter with every turn of the wheel. Tor Ent, the fendrake, stood over both shells with his wings half open. The gray fleck still sat under his one scale, and he fought anyway. Glasswing swept her low light in a circle around the sled. Pound-sized, 1 night old, she never broke that circle once. The champion's gold lay still along the sled's side. The crack's light ran over him with every beat. He had held this ground all night. Dead, he was still holding it. The cold shell sat dark against the bright one. Even now, it said nothing. On the human flank, the east ridge turned from black to first light. Maud pulled the staff against her hip and set the blade. She cut notch 60 in one firm stroke. 60, she said. 60 of 60. The staff is full. The herald wrote it down without looking at the page. 60 days of warmth spent to the last cut. Whatever the egg meant to do, it had run out of days to do it. At the ring, the Hollow King felt the light coming or heard it. The files came off the ring's flanks all at once. They made one spear, and the spear went for the sled. Not the gate, not the ring. The eggs. I came off the gate stone, calling every post inward. Sled! All posts, sled! Greatbond could not leave the arc without dropping the whole ring. Everything else turned in at once. Dirge's fire fell across the spear and cut it thinner. Squall's wind broke the middle and could not stop the head. On the human flank, Boyd swung his hunters in without an order from me. Their arrows raked the spear's side the whole way down. The Sea Chancellor's riders wheeled out of the ditch and hit its tail. The spear paid for every step of that run. It kept running. The head came through the inner line at a dead run. Over the eggs, Tor Ent, the fendrake, rose over the shells with his throat wide. Snowdrift and Tideson, the sea singer, hit the flanks together. Glasswing threw every color she had into their front rank. The point came on through all of it. One length out, I could see their eyes. Gray to the rim and empty and coming home. Then the sun cleared the ridge and hit the shell. The crack's thin light jumped out like a thrown door. Gold and rose ran over the sled, the yard, the wave. Every gray thing on the field stopped at once, mid-stride, mid-leap, claws still up. The wave stood one wingspan short of the sled. Not one claw came down out of it. The whole spear held there, shaking like dogs at a fence line. They could not take that last wingspan, or they would not. On the human flank, nobody on my line moved either. Boyd's bow came down slow on the flank. They stopped, he called, flat, like the words were strange to him. Maud kept her thumb on the 60th notch and did not breathe. Agnes, the Sea Chancellor, took one step toward the light and stopped herself. The herald's pen hung over the page, mid-word. Across the road, Stonecrown's companies stood frozen along their wagons. At the ring! My 12 held their posts and turned their heads as one. 12 throats went silent in the same breath. Every gray eye on the field was on one shell. So was every living one. At the ring. Only the Hollow King still moved. It kept tearing at the ring, stone by stone, faster now. It had walked 100 years toward that shell. Now it dug like a thing that had run out of hours. Over the eggs, the shell drank the sun the way a hearth drinks air. The heat off it bent the light above the sled. Power Ant stepped back off the shells, slow, on his own. No one called him back. Nothing about that light needed guarding anymore. The shell made a sound like river ice breaking up. Then the crack opened, end to end, along the dawn light seam. The two halves of the shell fell away from the seam. They hit the sled boards like dropped gates. I ran for the sled while they still rang. I stopped one length out, alone in the open light. Behind me, the whole field held its breath. My 12 held their posts with their heads turned. On the flank, no bow lowered and no bow loosed. Down the slope, the gray spear stayed frozen mid-charge. Not one claw came down out of it. The whole war stood still around one broken egg. The light stood up out of the shell like a pillar. It ran taller than the ringstones, taller than the smoke. Gold moved through it, then rose, then green, then violet. All 60 days of warmth, it had been hiding a sky. Then she rose. Her head came up through the light first. Black scale, wet from hatching, dark as the shell had been. But every color rode that black as she moved. Green and gold turned over her like oil on deep water. A crest ran back from her brow like a banner line. Violet light dripped off it and pooled on the boards. The rainbow had been hers all along. The shell had only kept it. She kept coming. Neck, then shoulders, then wings folded tight, and still more. No egg that size holds a thing that size. She came out anyway, the way flame stands off a torch. Her first breath went in like a tide turning. Her second came out as heat across the whole yard. Steam rolled off her back and burned gold in the light. She smelled of rain falling on hot stone. Her tail swept the shell halves off the sled like cups. Grapevine stood nearest, still braced against the ring arc. Grapevine, who filled a gate on his own. Next to her, he looked like a hound next to a horse. Then she opened her wings, and the yard went dark under them. They spread wider than a keep's gatehouse. The dawn came through the wingskin in moving colors. Light like that fell on every face on the field. Soldiers of two armies looked up with colors running over them. Maud spoke first from the flank, very quiet. The word went down the human line like water finding a crack. Two armies learned it in the same breath. Nobody said anything else. The cold shell sat dark on the boards under her. The champion's gold lay next to it, in her shadow. Even her rising had not made the dark ones speak. She looked at the whole field at once, war and all. The hollow king still hung off the ring's torn bow. The gray stood in their spear between her and my lines. The war had stopped, but nothing had ended. Somebody had to tell her what she had woken into. That was the warden's work, and the title was mine. I walked out and put myself between her and the field, my boots dragged in mud churned by a whole night of war. My shadow was a thumb mark inside hers. The 12 watched me walk it and held their posts. Her head came around, and her eye came down to me. One eye, gold-ringed, wider than a tower shield. Her breath rolled over me, hot as a bread oven. The words I had were 60 days old. I built them the way Maud built the staff, cut by cut. I spoke the count home loud enough for both armies. 9 I woke. 3 we carried home. 12 of 12, your clutches up. For a long breath, nothing on the field moved. Then her head dipped, to me, one slow handspan. A sound went through both armies at that. The mother of every flight had bowed her head first. 60 days I had carried her count on my back. She had heard every word of it. Then the 12 broke their posts and nobody called it. Dirge left the line first. My first again. He walked to her through the smoke and bowed low, wingtips to the mud all the way down. Squall came out of the sky and folded next to him. He dipped. Redmaw came in from the bow with his fire banked. Down! Verde Gris landed off the east curve and went low. Greatbone stepped back off the arc at last. He knelt the way a mountain would kneel. Onyx came up out of the mire ditch, dripping black. Basalt set his last stone and lowered his head onto it. Dawnfang, the dawn wyvern, dropped his proud head lowest of all. Tor Ent, the fendrake, came over on legs that shook. He dipped, and the fleck under his scale went with him. Tidesong, the sea singer, sang one low note and bowed into it. The tide line, home from the drowned yard. Snowdrift went down with frost still smoking off his back. The frost line, home from the keeper's graves. Glasswing came last, hound-sized, 1 night old. She dipped the way the big ones dipped, all the way. The glass line, home from the forest of its own bones. 12 lineages. 12 heads down, one after another in turn. I counted every dip the way I had called the wheel. The battle had turned, and not one blow had turned it. 60 days of warmth had bought this 1 minute. She lowered her head over them and breathed. The sound she made moved the mud around my boots. Her clutch had come home, and her clutch knew her. Maud stood at the staff with her palm over the 60 cuts. Her whole clutch, she said. 12 of 12, and every head down. The herald wrote, stopped, and wrote again. Agnes, the sea chancellor, went down on one knee in the ditch. In Stonecrown's column, Duncoon, the keeper, wept into his irons. Along the wagons, Stonecrown's companies knelt one file at a time. Ingrid stayed on her feet by the chain wagons. She stood alone and watched her house's secret open its wings. Then the sound of tearing stones stopped. The Hollow King had dug at the ring all night. Now its claws hung still in the broken bow. It turned. A hillside turning is a slow and awful thing. Every bow on the human flank came up at once. I threw my arm out and called the hold. Nothing on that slope needed one more arrow. It faced her across the burned ring, and it did not charge. It cried. I knew that sound before it finished leaving the ground. I had heard it once through a sealed vault door, at home. One voice then, behind a span of stone, in the dark. This came out of 10,000 throats at once. 10,000 dead throats, and everyone made the same cry. It was not a war sound. Dogs left out in the cold make that sound. It rolled over the field and nobody breathed under it. The riders' horses screamed and fought their lines. The gray spear sank down where it stood, heads dropping. Somewhere down the human line, a soldier wept out loud. Boyd had counted gray wings on the sky for 60 days. He had no count for this. His glass hung forgotten on his chest. Pity is a strange thing to feel for a hillside. I felt it anyway. She came down off the sled boards. One step, then two. Each step came up through the ground into my boots. She walked past me, past the 12, past the burned stones. Her open wings threw colors over the whole ruined ring. The gray spears split apart to let her through. Not one of them raised a claw as she passed. She stopped at the broken bough, a wingspan from its claws. It stood over her, and it did not swing. She looked up into its cry, and she did not flinch. Its claws sank slowly into the mud at its own feet. The mother, and the thing her door had refused, face to face, in full morning light, after 100 years. The same light fell on the black scale and the gray. Nobody on the field so much as swallowed. Even the herald's pen hung still over the page. Maud came up next to me, staff in both hands. Her thumb still rode the 60th cut. 100 years it walked to reach her, she said, and now it's here. All it does is cry. The staff stood full. 60 cuts, 60 days of warmth spent. Every answer left in the world stood on that slope. What she did next was the answer to everything. Her chest billowed like a sail taking wind. I threw my arm out and held our line still. Then the mother sang. The sound came up through the ground first. It hit my boots before it hit my ears. One low note held under everything else. The mud shook in rings around the burned stones. My teeth ached with it. Down the flank, spear points shivered in men's hands. 12 held still where their bows had ended. Glasswing pressed against my leg, one night old. I set my hand flat on her warm back. Her wings threw small colors across the mud. By the ring, Tide Song, the sea singer, raised her head. She caught the mother's note and held it under her. Two voices now, the oldest and the newest. The song doubled, and the whole slope answered it. The Hollow King's cry broke off in the middle. 10,000 throats went quiet in one stroke. The whole hillside of it leaned into her song, the way a cold man leans at an open door. For 100 years it had asked one thing. Now she stood at its feet and answered. The gray answered her before the Hollow King could. The nearest gray drake shook once, all over. The rot on its hide caught the light and burned. It burned off gold like ash in sunrise. The gray smoke went up and was gone. Clean white bone stood where the drake had stood. The bone held its shape for one long breath. Then it folded down soft like a horse lying down. Then it moved. The bone slid through the mud toward her, not crawling, flowing. Every bow on the human flank came up again. I called the hold, and no one needed it twice. Pikes went down all along the ditch. The whole gray spear went the same way, rank by rank, wrought up in gold ash, bone down into a river. Boyd had his glass up on the flank. The rots burning off them, he called down the line. Clean bone under it. All of it clean. Maud's knuckles went white around the staff. Fire only ever held the gray, she said. Only the mother of a thing can call it home. An old soldier next to her pulled off his helmet. Then the whole human line did the same. In Stonecrown's column, the keeper stood up in his irons. It was never a plague, Duncoon said, loud enough for his own soldiers to hear it. Look at them, those are her children. The river of bone parted around a ringstone. Her murdered children refused at the door. 100 years they have cried to come home. Maud looked down at the staff in her hands. We wrote it in the books as the hollowing, she said. It was children at a shut door. Her song rose one step. The Hollow King answered the only way left to it. It did not fall. It came apart. The crown of it let go first. A whole dragon slid out of the mass, gray and whole. It went white in the air and poured, then 10 more, then 100. The hillside shut itself from the top down. Necks came loose from shoulders that were never theirs. Wings shook free of a century of wrong bodies. Whole flights fell free that no one living had seen. They flew one last shape on the way down. Every piece burned gold as it came away. The ash went up, the bone came down. It ran downhill like spring water finding its bed, a river of clean bone, wide as the West Road. It bent around the burned ring stones. It ran past my boots and never touched me. I stood still in the middle of it. 100 years walked home past my knees. Greybon stepped back off the ark to let it pass. Dirge stood over the river with his head low. Bones had built him. Bones were going home past him. Snodrift stood in the river's cold steam. Frost smoked off his back into the gold light. The frost line watched the old crime wash out. Maud turned her palm toward the sled. The two shells sat there, the dark one and the broken one. His egg carried her dead clutch home, she said. Hers carried her. The river ran on between her words. That was the pair's whole work, start to end. Torrent, the fendrake, went up without an order. He flew one wide turn over the river of bone. Dirge's fire had held it at a fleck, dusk after dusk. Never less, never out. Her song finished it. The fleck he had carried since the canyon burned out mid-sky. One gold spark off one scale, and gone. Boyd's glass found him before I found my voice. "It's out!" Boyd shouted. "The fleck's out! Clean scale under it!" Poor Ent rolled over in the morning air like a whelp. Dirge put his head back and threw fire at the sky. Every dusk since the canyon, paid in one spark. No more ward fires now, no more checking one scale at every nightfall. My legs nearly went up from under me. Maud's hand closed on my arm and stayed there. The river did not stop at her feet. She turned and sang it past her, down the slope. It poured over the lip of the butchering yard, down into the broken floor the Hollow King had climbed from. The old pit drank a century of dragons. Where the bones settled, the glass followed it. Glass ran over the yard floor like ice taking a pond. Cobalt first, then amber, then rose. The bloom light along the tree line steadied and held. The ground under the whole valley went still. The butchering yard went quiet under glass. 100 years of open wound closed in one morning. Cap. The herald wrote without once looking at his page. Agnes, the sea chancellor, pressed both hands over her mouth. Duncoon, the keeper, sat down in his irons and wept. 100 years of keeper apology, finally spent. By the chain wagons, Stonecrown's regent moved at last. I saw Ingrid drag the tarp back herself. She hauled one chain off the boards, two-handed, old black iron, forged for the butchering. She got 3 steps toward the sled with it. The mother turned her head. That was all she did. One look, the whole length of the field. The chain went soft in Ingrid's gloves like wax. She dropped it, and it slagged where it lay. On the wagons, every chain her ancestor forged went with it. It cooled in the mud as dull iron ingots. Then Stonecrown's regent went down on both knees. In front of her army, and mine, and the mother, nobody laughed. Nobody spoke a word at her. The herald only wrote. I turned back to the ring and left her kneeling. The mother had already looked away from her. The last of the Hollow King came apart while she sang. The final piece was small, a drake no bigger than Torrent. It came apart quiet, like snow sliding off a roof. Its bones ran down the slope and joined the rest. The river thinned, and the song thinned with it. One note less, then one less than that. The last bones ran under the glass as it closed. The glass sealed over them, bright as a lens. She held the last note until it was only breath. Then the mother folded her wings, and it was done. And I heard the quiet, real quiet, with weight to it. No cry under the world's floor, no count ticking hot against my palm, no wind full of wings. Boyd swept his glass along the whole west sky. "Nothing," he said, "not one gray wing on the wind." He had counted 40 wings from the ridge, then 200 riding one wind west, then an empty sky that was worse than both. Now, he lowered the glass and left it down. Maud set her palm flat over the staff's 60 cuts. "Not killed," she said, "taken home." The field sat down where it stood. Whole companies went down in the mud like tired boys. Some men laughed, more of them cried. 2 armies on one field, and nothing left between them. The mother stood over the sealed yard, wings loose. Colors ran off her onto the new glass. She lowered her head and breathed on it once. Steam bloomed and cleared, and the glass shone. Her children lay under it, home and quiet. Glasswing yawned and slept standing against my boot. I wiped my face with the back of my glove. Nobody on that field would hold it against me. Down the slope, the gray spear was gone. No bodies, no burn pits left to dig. Just clean mud and morning light on new glass. The first quiet in 100 years settled over the cradle. Maud cut nothing. 60 cuts, and the staff was full and finished. She leaned it against the sled like a spent tool. Down by the sled, the 2 shells sat in the sun. The dark one, and the broken one next to it, and next to them, the champion's gold, lying still. We had cut his grave at first light, by the ring stones. Nobody had found the heart to fill it yet. Every dead thing on this field had gone home, all but one. One grave still stood open. The noon sun stood straight over the new glass. I climbed the ring stones and raised one hand. Both armies got up out of the mud. "The compact," I said. "We finish it now." 2 fields worth of men formed up around the ring. The 12 settled along the high stones over us. Poor Ant stayed at the sled, out of old habit. Glasswing slept against its runner, one night old. Maud stood at my right with the finished staff. Boyd stood at my left, glass hanging still. The herald came up with the page and the book, the same man who read the terms at the pass gate. The same flat voice that turned paper into law. He set the keeper's book on the whitest stone. He turned it so the old king's seal faced out. Banners moved in close on both sides. Coldharbor's crown, the keeper's mark. Stonecrown's colors carried low and steady. He lifted the compact page into the sun. Clause 1 is kept, the herald said. The egg opened at the cradle on Stonecrown soil. He tipped his head toward the sealed yard. The mother stood over it, colors running down her wings. Clause 3 is dead, she rose. No shell goes back. No book burns. He laid the page flat on the stone. Clause 2, word for word. If the mother rises, the keeper's book is read to every crown, and Stonecrown stands absolved by its own confession. Then he opened the book and read. He read it level, page after page, sparing no one. He held each page out so both armies saw it. The old ink, the old seal, the old hand. The whole field heard what the glass under us already held. Men from the keeper's banner mouthed the words with him. Their families had hidden this book for 100 years. 100 years ago, the king of Stonecrown butchered his own frostflight. He fed his murdered dragons to the mother egg. She refused the kill. The hollowing was the refusal. Down Stonecrown's ranks, men stared at their own boots. An old bannerman gripped his pole with both hands. The herald turned pages and kept his voice flat. His keepers buried what he butchered. His crypt kept the law he broke, and his book kept the confession no king would speak. He closed the book on the black seal. He set both hands on it and looked up. Stonecrown stands absolved by its own confession, the herald said. The kingdom confessed. The kingdom stands. The words went down their ranks like rain on dry ground. Shoulders dropped all along the Stonecrown line. One soldier pressed his fist to his chest plate, then another, then the whole line, armor knocking like slow hail. 100 years of weight, set down in one sentence. The herald turned toward the chain wagons. The slagged ingots still sat gray in the mud there. The kingdom, he said, not the woman. The wager's shield died with the first chain. By the wagons, Stonecrown's regent stood between her own guards. Her oldest marshal walked to her, bareheaded, slow. He lifted the seal chain over her bowed head. He drew the signet ring off her glove. The court strips what the court gave, the marshal said, by Stonecrown's own law, not by the valley's. Ingrid knelt down on the new glass, straight-backed. Nobody jeered, nobody said one word at her. Her own banner went past her without stopping. I gave her one look and nothing else. No one can lift that kind of kneeling. No one should. Then I turned to better work. Bring the keeper, I said. The marshal himself waved him through the line. Duncoon came up in his family's irons, walking straight. A Stonecrown smith followed with hammer and chisel. That same hammer had set the pins at the pass gate. Now, it knocked them out, one ringing blow each. The irons dropped onto the glass and lay there. Duncan rubbed his wrists with his scarred palms. The surety walks free, the herald said. The wager is settled, every clause. I looked past him at the sealed yard. Glass trees, gold ash still settling, her children under the shine. This place keeps her dead now, I said. It needs hands that keep things. Duncan, keeper of the cradle. Agnes, the sea chancellor, set her hand on his shoulder. Maud knocked the staff once on the ringstone. Witnessed, Boyd said, loud enough for both armies. Duncan looked at the yard for a long breath. 100 years of apology, the keeper said. Paid this morning, I'll keep it well. He lifted his family's irons off the glass. He hung them on the sled's rail like tools coming home. Boyd's glass came up fast. East, he said. Gray wings on the east wind. Bows lifted all along the ditch again. A thin file of the gray came over the valley rim. Ragged wings, low and slow, full of holes. The mother turned her head and sang one note. The file folded out of the air toward her. The rot burned off gold, high up, wing by wing. Clean bone drifted down onto the sealed yard. The glass grew over it, soft as ice taking a pond. Every bow came down without an order. They're not attacking, Boyd said. They're arriving. Maud watched the last gold ash thin out. The call went east a long way, she said. Her children will be walking home for days yet. And every one of them lands clean. Dodd! Then a rider came down the slope at a dead run. One of the Sea Chancellor's coastmen, mud to the hip. He'd ridden the relay road hard enough to lose a stirrup. I waved the line open and let him through. From the relay line, he got out. Coldharbor answered, tower by tower, up the whole coast. The horizon fires are going out. The gray left the seawalls in the night. Agnes took the rider's arm in both hands. She held it the way she'd hold a rail in weather. No more counting days of wall, the Sea Chancellor said. Her voice broke in the middle, and nobody minded. The herald called both crowns to the ringstones. Agnes came first and did not kneel. She put her salt-worn hands flat on the stone, the way she did over her charts. Coldharbor swore at its seawall, she said. It swears again here, at the cradle, for good. Stonecrown's marshal came second and did kneel. Stonecrown swears where its crime lies buried, he said, and where its confession stands read. The herald raised the compact page one last time. Then both crowns say the same words together, he said. Warden of the flights, of 12, and of the mother. Two armies set it back across one field, Coldharbor's ranks and Stonecrown's, one breath, one count. The sound rolled over the glass and off the trees. The 12 lifted their heads along the ring at the sound. Snotdrift called once from the high stones, and Red Ma answered. Down by the sled, Glasswing woke and blinked at the noise. Maud laid her palm flat over the notched staff. Boyd grinned at the open sky and counted nothing. For one breath, the title sat light on me. First time since they hung it on me at the tally. Mother watched none of the swearing. Crowns had never once been her business. She stood over the sealed yard while the kingdom spoke. Noonlight broke into colors along her folded wings. Then, in the middle of the last echo, she moved. Her first step hushed both armies at once. She came down off the yard, quiet for a thing her size. The ground carried her steps up through our boots. Both armies opened a lane without one order given. Her shadow slid ahead of her over the new glass, past the ringstones, past the open grave we had cut at first light. The mother was walking to the two eggs, and to the gold body lying next to them. I reached the sled before she did. I put my palm flat on the cold shell. My, dark since the 9th hatch, and mine anyway. Torrent backed off the runners and bowed his head low. Her shadow slid up over the sled and stopped. Two armies at our backs went dead quiet. Her steps came up through the glass and into my boots. Then even the steps stopped. The mother bent her head down to her twin, not to her own broken shell, to the dark one under my hand. Her eye came down level with my chest. It was wide as a tower shield. The whole yard sat inside it. Glass trees, gold light, one man with his hand on a cold egg. Jun-kun came up to the sled rail, slow. His family's iron still hung there, quiet as tools. 2 eggs from one crypt, the keeper said. He kept his voice low, the way you do in a sick room. The pair's law kept to the last line. His egg's work ended at 9. Hers was to carry the mother home. He looked from the dark shell up to her. Now the mother wakes his. One last time. She touched her brow to the shell. Color ran down her neck and poured into it. The dark surface drank the light and held it. Heat rose under my palm out of nowhere. My hand jumped off the shell on its own. I put it straight back. Maud stepped in at my other side. At the valley gate, she said. The warm one flared against this one, once. I called it nothing back then. She watched the color crawl under my fingers. It was a promise. She's keeping it. The shell warmed the way a hearth warms, slow and deep and from far inside, but it showed no letters yet. It was waiting to be fed, and there was only one feeding left on this field. Boyd turned a slow circle, sky glass down, nothing on any wind, Boyd said. First empty sky I've ever been glad of. Mother lifted her head and turned. She turned to the gold body next to the sled. He lay the way we had laid him out at first light, wings folded, neck straight, the claw wound washed clean. The afternoon sun sat on his scales like lamplight on coin. The 12 rose along the ringstones, heads low. Poor Ent made a sound I had never heard from him. Low and broken and held. He had shared every egg watch with that gold. Down the field, men pulled off their helmets. Nobody ordered it. It moved through both armies row by row. Agnes stood with her fist pressed to her chest. The Sea Chancellor had pulled a drowned flight from her own bay. Down Stonecrown's line, pikes tipped forward, points to the glass. A soldier's salute given to a dragon. 100 years late and right on time. The mother stood over him for a long breath. Then she sang, not the note that unmade the hollow king, lower, smaller, a song built for one. The sound got into my teeth and my ribs. Against the runner, Glasswing woke and went still. 1 night old, and she knew to be still. The song moved over the champion like slow water. Where it passed, the gold came apart into light, not smoke, not ash, light, lifting off him the way frost lifts off a field at sunup. It rose through the glass trees and thinned into the blue. What stayed behind was bone, clean gold bone, bright as new coin, not one shadow of gray anywhere on it. My throat closed. I let it. Maud said it plain, loud enough for the whole field. Her dead she takes home, kills she refuses. She nodded at the bright bones on the glass. He fell shielding a man. He was never a kill. He is hers, and she's carrying him home. The mother gathered the bones with one foreclaw. She lifted them the way you lift a sleeping child. She laid them against the dark shell, piece by piece. The long skull she set down last, and gentlest. Then she drew her claw back and waited. Offered, not taken, not fed to it by any hand of ours. Mourned first. Rendered by his own mother. Given. The bones went to light against the shell. The shell drank it the way dry ground drinks rain. Boyd's hand found my shoulder and gripped it, and the old dark surface finally spoke. HTS. Lineage accepted. Gold. Steady gold letters on a shell I had stopped watching. Then a second line rose under the first. Not her count. Not the dead flights coming home. The old counter. Mine. It had sat silent since the 9th hatch. Now it said one last number and was done. Brood 10 bore you and time sex. 10, Boyd said, hoarse. He never lifted the skyglass. This count he took with his bare eyes. Maud's thumb moved along the notch staff and stopped. 60 cuts and no cut for this one. This number had never needed a day. Dunkun gripped the rail with both scarred hands. 9, the crypt said, and I believed it, the keeper said. 9 was never the end. It was his half of the work. This morning she finished hers. The crack ran fast along the gold seam. The whole sled shook with it. Glasswing scrambled clear and watched for Maud's feet. The shell that woke 9 flights opened once more. Light the color of him broke out through it. A small gold claw hooked over the edge, then a blunt wet head blinking cross at the sun. The hatchling hauled himself out into the afternoon light, house cat sized, gold to the last scale. A piece of shell rode out on his back like a shield. He shook it off, slid down the curve, and hit my boot. I knelt and put out both hands. He climbed into them like he had done it before. Needle claws hooked into my sleeves and held on. His heart beat fast against my fingers. He looked up at me and did not look away. The one they stole at the tally never got to. They had him off the stands before I ever spoke. This one weighed less than a loaf of bread, and no crown on this field could lift him from me. The mother lowered her head over the both of us. Her breath moved my coat like a door left open. She looked at him for a long moment. She did not take him. She left him lying in my hands. Boyd cleared his throat. You said it at the grave, Boyd said. You never got to name him, so name him now. The field waited. 2 armies, 12 flights, 1 mother. He flew point on every road west, I said. He stood every egg watch we ever set. He stood under the last claw. I lifted the hatchling level with my eyes. He gripped my thumb and stared back. Vij ill. His name is Vij ill. Maud knocked the staff once against the sled rail. Witnessed, Boyd said, loud for both armies. Witnessed, said Agnes, the sea chancellor, her hand flat on the rail. Witnessed, the keeper said, and it goes in the book. The first page after the confession. A better page. For Ent called first, from his place by the runners. He had earned the first call, and every dragon there knew it. Snowdrift answered off the high stones. Then Redmaw, then all 12, one after another, down the ring. The counting ritual, given back as a welcome. Vigil pushed himself up in my hands and answered. One small cracked note, his first. It carried farther than a sound that small should. Along the stones the 12 called again, louder. The mother laid one low note over all of it. The glass trees rang with it. Down both lines the name went man to man. Stonecrown said it to Coldharbor. Coldharbor said it back. The ache I had carried from the grave let go. They stole a gold dragon from me once, nameless. Nobody stole this one. He was born into my open hands. He was named in front of 2 kingdoms, with his mother watching. The gold was finally, fully mine. Vijay ill turned twice in my palms and folded up, done with his first hour alive. He weighed nothing, and he warmed both my hands. Behind us, the light left both shells at once. The gold letters faded off the dark one. Her broken shell dimmed in the same breath. The 2 shells went still together. Glass, dark. Their work was done. I climbed the ringstones at first light, Vigil on my shoulder. He hooked his needle claws into my collar and rode the climb. Topping. Below us, the butchering yard had stopped being one. Nobody ordered that. It grew out of the ground on its own. The mother lay coiled through the middle of the glass trees. 12 dragons slept along her sides like spokes on a wheel. Gloomlight ran over their scales in slow waves. Where the Hollow King had stood, the glass had closed over, smooth and clear, like ice on a deep pond. 100 years of wound, and now you could walk on it. Dunkun worked the planting rows under her near wing. The keeper had traded his family's irons for a spade. He set green shoots where his book said the old graves lay. They came up fast between the glass trunks, faster than any garden had a right to. Wings above, roots under, a garden of glass and wings. Boyd still swept the skyglass every dawn. Habit, he said. The sky gave him back birds instead of wings. Small brown ones, loud and rude, west of the passes again. He counted those too. Somebody should, Boyd said. First count in 100 years. The climbs for good reasons. The herald found me on the stones with his tally book open. The court will ask warden, so I ask it here. How are the flights divided between the 2 crowns? They aren't, I said. They're hers. She sends them or nobody flies. The mother lifted her head off the glass at that. She looked at the herald the way Weather looks at a man. He wrote one short line and closed the book. Agnes laughed from the garden steps. Then Coldharbor learns to ask a mother nicely, the sea chancellor said. We'll keep the lamps lit for whoever she sends. Biver, the mother held the sea chancellor's eye for a long moment. Then she set her head back down in the blooms. Stonecrown's new court sent no demand at all. That was the whole treaty, her choice, and not one line of paper. We left the cradle when the green stood knee-high. The keeper stayed inside her wind shadow, spade in hand. He had spent his life guarding one egg in the dark. Now he kept a garden with a mother over it. The cradle was her roost now. She rose anyway when the column formed. She flew our road east, her shadow over the whole line. The road home ran easier than the road out. No gray road any wind Boyd could find. Every village on the way turned out at the fences. Children ran the fence lines under tide song shadow, shouting. The names ran ahead of us faster than horses. The valley came up green under a clean noon sky. I halted the column on the last ridge. Vijay woke on my shoulder and gripped tight. Go up, I told the 12, in order. Let them count you. Dirge went first. He had gone first since the beginning. Squall climbed past him and took the high wind. Red Maw trailed ember light off both wings. Verde Gris flashed copper green against the blue. Grapebone went up slow, and the ridge shook under us. And the fendrake rose clean, not one fleck under any scale. On Ike's shone like wet river stone. Salt held the middle of the line, steady as his name. Dawnfang burned pale gold high over all of them. Tide Song, the sea singer, sang the whole climb up. Snowdrift threw down cold air we felt on the ridge. Glasswing went up last, pony-sized now, scattering the light. Then the mother rose, and the noon went dim. Her wings swept across the sun like a gatehouse closing. Under that shadow, the whole valley began to roar. Boyd stood in his stirrups and read the sky out loud. 12 flights, Boyd called, so the road could hear it. And their mother over every one of them. The sky held every wing we had, all but one. Vigil pushed himself up on my shoulder and called into the noise. One small cracked note against all that thunder. 12 calls came back down the wind for him. Then one low note under them all, and the fence posts hummed with it. Maud rode next to me, the staff across her saddle. 13 flights flew before the hollowing, Maud said. 13 alive today. And the smallest one makes the count true. We rode down to the gate through the cheering. We passed the tally stands on the way in. Bare boards, swept clean, no chains on them anywhere. Vijay Jill looked at them the way hatchlings look at furniture. Nothing on those boards was ever going to hold him. His name went down the crowd ahead of us. Jill. Kai. He didn't know it was his. He'd learn. No envoys stood at the gate. No foreign banners hung from the arch. Nobody ran up the road holding a plea. Just the valley yelling itself hoarse for its own. Edmund stood deep in the crowd by the gatepost. Plain coat, no sigil, silver at the temples now. He watched the gold hatchling riding my shoulder. Only that. I held his eye for one step, then let it go. The crowd folded around him, and we passed through. Next morning, we carried the 2 shells to the boneyard. The mason cut 2 hollows in the boundary stone. I set the dark shell into its place with both hands. Maud set the broken bright one in next to it. They sat flush, side by side, glass dark in the old stone. That stone had marked where the burying ground began. Now it held the 2 things that ended the burying. Maud brought her roost charter out one last time. 13 marks on the page, and every mark flying. She rolled it shut and tied the cord. Then she laid her hand flat across both shells. Nothing left to feed, Maud said. Nothing left to cure. She patted the stone the way she'd pat an old horse. Best ledger I ever closed. The mother lowered her head level with the stone. She breathed once over both shells, slow and warm. Then she rose, wheeled once over the yard, and turned west. Her garden stood waiting under a keeper's care. The 12 watched her out of sight from the roost stones. Then they settled, wing against wing, the way a family fills a house. The yard emptied slow after that. Boyd took his hunters home to their suppers. The mason packed his tools and walked out whistling. Maud stayed. I stayed. Vijay Giles slept against my neck, heavier than yesterday. Maud leaned the notched staff against the boundary stone, 60 cuts top to bottom every day of the warmth. She looked at it a long time. Then she left it standing where it leaned. It's done counting, she said. So am I. I put my hand on the dark shell. Cold now, quiet now, stone resting in stone. No letters rose to meet my palm. Good. DJ ill breathed small and even against my collar. Behind us, the 12 lined the roost in the evening light. In front of us, the staff stood at 60 cuts against the stone. Maud looked at the shells, then up at me. Go on, she said. You earned the whole line. They thought they were burying me with the bones, I said. They were planting them. The roost full of wings, the staff and its 60 cuts, a small gold weight breathing against my neck. All of this, is what grew.